the Managing Director of our Institute for Environmental Solutions, Inese Suija-Markova, for the opening speech.
Thank you, Robert, so much. Dear speakers, participants, colleagues, partners, and friends, let me extend a very warm welcome this morning and thank once again all of you for your attendance. As already mentioned by my colleague Robert, today's seminar is organized in the frame of the project Climate Responsible Agriculture for Latvia, or as we call it, LIFE16, which is the project supported by the European Union LIFE Programme and also the Latvian government. With the help of this project, we strive to implement and test effective and economically feasible means for the reduction of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time preserving stable income for farmers and applying an ecosystem-based approach. And that involves testing and demonstrating such unexploited methods in Latvia as no-till farming, biochar incorporation into the soil, and controlled drainage. Additionally, the project and our institute have been testing the capabilities of digital data technologies such as Earth observation and various sensor technologies for improved evaluation of greenhouse gas emissions, which is also one of the focus areas of today's seminar. Climate change has definitely been called the defining challenge of our age, and yet the global community, subnational and national governments lack adequate information to understand whether the actions to address this climate challenge are succeeding or failing to mitigate it. While we understand that technologies alone are not silver bullet solutions, tools such as Earth observation promises to provide new advances in data collection for monitoring climate change mitigation and adaptation, especially where traditional means of data exploration and analysis are costly, time-consuming, and very often incomplete. Particularly in the policy domain, more fine-grained data are needed to evaluate policy and program performance and to understand whether actions to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions or adapt to climate change impacts are being achieved. Despite these technological advances, we see that their uptake into policy processes and applications has been relatively limited and is lagging behind, also in our country. So the purpose of today's seminar is to ensure an open dialogue, opinion and experience exchange about the methods of greenhouse gas accounting in agriculture, forestry and land use, and assess the possibilities for Earth observation data to support the monitoring. And of course, also to discuss the current limitations and challenges. So on behalf of our team, I wish you all an interesting seminar and may it give lots of food for thought and inspiration for our joint effort towards Europe's vision to become a net zero emitter of greenhouse gases by 2050. And at the very end of my speech, I would like to take an opportunity and thank all the speakers who have agreed to present in today's seminar, and also to thank everyone who has contributed their time, knowledge and advice so far in the LIFE16 project, and especially the project partners who have been a great support to us. That involves the Latvian Fund for Nature as the lead partner, the Latvian Rural Advisory and Training Center, and the Czech Center for Science and Society. So thanks once again to everyone, and I wish you all a very good and interesting and rich day regarding the information and experience exchange. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Inese. So we can now move on to the first presentation of the event. René Kolditz is a policy officer at the Director General for Climate Action. Could you please share your screen?
Good morning. Yes, I will try to do that.
Thank you. And I'd also like to remind that I will use these chat reactions when the time is running out. 5 minutes for when 5 minutes are remaining and 1 minute for 1 minute.
Thank you. Could you remind me how much time I have?
20 minutes,
20 minutes
for your speaking part, and then 10 minutes for questions and answers.
Yeah. How do you see the presentation for the moment? Is this the right
great.
mode?
No? The previous one was working.
So let's try this again. Is this working?
Yeah, but we sort of see a slight black screen where the chat video is. Maybe you can minimize that one. This is this always is part of the online event.
So let me stop sharing first. Share again. Could you tell me what you see?
Yeah, we see the PowerPoint, but it's not in full screen. It's like in editing mode.
Now?
Now it's like in the presentation view where we see slide 1 of 14 and the notes section and the next slide section.
So let's try this again. And how about now?
Still the same as it was before. Sorry about this. Maybe we can share the presentation from our side.
No, I will try once more. So
okay.
And I think this should be good now.
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much.
Good, thanks. So we have at least solved that problem. Good morning, everybody. I will briefly talk about the LULUCF proposal, which came out on the 14th of July, together with 12 other legal proposals for the Fit for 55 package to mitigate the climate, the emissions from the EU to by 55%. To quickly indicate where LULUCF stands in the overall framework in the Green Deal, you can see we link to a variety of dimensions. I think quite clear is the dimension of the environment, to the energy, and to the agriculture. But of course, LULUCF is also linked to forestry, and also to the carbon farming initiative, the circular action plan, farm to fork strategy. And then in the boxes around the rings or the circles, you can see the various strategies, initiatives, but also legal texts which are relevant for LULUCF as well. So this gives a quite comprehensive pictures of where we are in the overall policy framework. The LULUCF regulation addresses several dimensions, but also benefits and opportunities. The bullets here list various of those. So of course, we want to be on track for a climate neutral EU by 2050 and give a clear orientation for the sector. And in the first part of the presentation, I will mainly talk about this. From the modeling we have undertaken, we see that the mitigation costs for achieving carbon removals, additional carbon removals in LULUCF are not particularly high. We see various business opportunities for carbon storage products, but we see also the need to mobilize public funding under the CAP, but also private funding by carbon credits or price premiums. And then there are various opportunities for win-win or win-win-win, or even 4 times win opportunities between climate, biodiversity, bioeconomy, also the economy overall. So there are various opportunities to have mutual benefits. But also in relation to the digital agenda, we actually see that there could be lower costs in compliance if remote sensing, in particular through the Copernicus Programme, but also other systems, were more taken on board for identifying where mitigation actions need to be done and how it can be reported. Because, of course, the inventories on which the reporting is today mainly based are quite expensive, even though they don't only service LULUCF also. And then there are also mutual benefits between monitoring of high biodiverse and carbon-rich areas. So here we think mainly about, for instance, old-growth forests. So this is an illustration you may or may not have seen before. It does not come from the proposal, but it is basically the pathway to climate neutrality in the climate law. You see the different sectors in colors, which all decrease their emissions below the zero line. In dashed green, you see then LULUCF. You also see a little bit of dashed red coming in. That's technical removals. Think about BACs or direct air capture, which will need to kick in at a certain point and deliver additional technical removals. And what you have to focus on is basically these the red line, which is the net number, and which decreases then to and below with zero in and after 2050. If you look at the endpoint, so to say, what you see is that all sectors will have reduced their emissions significantly, if not dramatically, except for one, and that's the green sector. And you see this is non-CO2 agriculture. These are the emissions which are hard to abate, and therefore the majority of remaining emissions at the time in 2050 will likely be from the agriculture non-CO2 sector. Where do we stand today with regards to emissions and removals from land? So LULUCF, I have to say it's always a net number. We have always emissions and removals, or only emissions if we look at the CO2, at the CH4 and N2O components also reported under LULUCF. However, in the last, over the last about 10 years, we have seen the carbon removals in forests, soils, and wood products have been decreasing. This is not a good pattern. We have, on the other hand, on land, stable emissions from livestock and fertilizers, which are reported under agriculture non-CO2. So we don't see an emission reduction at all in this sector. And policy-wise, we have a very complex framework, because we actually have two regulations which address emissions on land. That is the LULUCF regulation for the LULUCF sector, and the effort sharing regulation, which addresses agriculture non-CO2 among various other emissions from waste, industry, and energy sectors, which are not under the ETS. And there are no specific targets then for agriculture. So one could decide to do, I'm drawing an example here, everything under waste, and there will not be an emission reduction on agriculture and CO2. A very complex policy framework with limited flexibility between the two instruments. So what do we need to do? We need to have a much simpler and transparent framework in both the LULUCF regulation alone, because if you read the current one, you will find different rules for different categories and various other provisions which make the accounting process rather complicated. And I speak of experience here. When you try to put this together from the greenhouse gas inventories, that is very challenging. But also we need to, over time, at least simplify the whole policy framework which addresses land. We need to increase the carbon removals in the EU And for this, the Commission has, in light of the climate law, set out a target of 310 megatons by 2030. And we also put forward a pathway how we will continue thereafter. So the Commission proposes a climate neutral EU land sector by 2035, and that would include LULUCF and the before mentioned agriculture non-CO2 emissions. So basically what the proposal lays out are three phases. We have a first phase from 21, so today, so to say, to 25, which corresponds to the first compliance period under the current regulation. And we would basically maintain the current regulation with all its rules and provisions. We apply very minor changes to the current legal text framework. From 2026 to 2030, we put forward an EU-wide target of 310 megatons of net removals, and we allocate this also to member states, so member state specific targets, simplify the regulations significantly. So no different rules for different categories. It's all based on the total LULUCF number, and it's all based then on directly based on the reported numbers, directly based and taken from the reported numbers to the UNFCCC. And thirdly, by 2035, a climate neutral land sector. And here the Commission doesn't put forward any targets, but we basically put forward a process of how can we arrive there, planning process. So here again, in a nutshell, what the regulatory stability will entail. So for the first period, we keep rules, we improve the accounting for natural disturbances, and it also includes a clarification for an additional compensation, which was in the original legal text for Finland. That's a legal clarification on how this should be done. As I mentioned before, for 26 to 25, a simplified framework for LULUCF reporting and accounting, but also enhanced monitoring. And I will come to this in my second part. We take the full LULUCF scope and we have then targets and set out annual trajectories. That's maybe more technical point. We don't need to go into this today. And for 2035, the integrated land sector approach, climate neutral by 2035, and this planning process. So how would this look? For instance, in our view, there will be national energy and climate plans due by, I think, mid-24, in which member states should provide clear pictures on their increased net removals from LULUCF and emission reductions from agriculture. And then by the end of 25, the Commission would come forward with an impact assessment and a legal proposal for the perspective towards 2035. Improved monitoring. And I think this is of interest to this audience. We would upgrade the MRV, the monitoring, reporting and verification system, to increase the monitoring accuracy and basically have everything based on reported data to meet the targets. We would increasingly build the reporting on geographical data, including remote sensing, and have a better determination, so spatial delineation of biodiverse and carbon-rich areas, adaptation zones, protected areas. And you will find these additional provisions in the Annex 3 to the legal proposal. Why is this important? Let's take carbon-rich areas, old growth forests. The additional mitigation from such forest is certainly not very high. But if we would lose them, the emissions would be enormous, and therefore knowing where these zones are and adequately protecting them is certainly of very high interest to the member states and to the LULUCF budget. Besides their uniqueness and importance for biodiversity. This is why such zones should be clearly identified and monitored, and then also consequently protected. On the scope, from 26, we extend this to all land categories. There is a very small part of LULUCF reporting which is not under the current legal framework. We would base the compliance completely on reported data. And then from 2031 also include the reported agriculture done CO2, as I mentioned before. Improved monitoring. So how does LULUCF monitoring work? There are usually two components: activity data. In LULUCF, this is mostly area. In a few cases, also the amount of fertilizer, so nitrogen, you put on the ground, but the vast majority of LULUCF is the activity data is the area under a certain land use category or land use change category. And then you have emission factors, which are values specific to each land use or change. And they are established at different tiers, levels, so to say. If you don't know what your emissions are, you have a fallback option, so to say, by the IPCC Tier 1, which are established values. Or as a member state, you have measurements in the fields, you have studies, and you submit so-called Tier 2 national regional emission factors to the UNFCCC. They undergo a review process, and then they will be accepted. So you can basically tune the emission factors to your local regional situations. And thirdly, Tier 3 means you do a rather complex modeling of emission factors, which is of course very useful, but also requires significant amounts of data, including spatial data. Then you have a reporting-based emission monitoring, which requires this reliable data. So the simplifications we make in the legal proposals by basing the accounting directly on reported data without any, so to say, additional filters implies that the reported data need to be highly reliable. So to say, we need to increase the accuracy of those. So now for agricultural land, and that's also an example you see to the right, we already have established systems under the CAP, for instance, not for all agricultural land, but round about 90%. In some member states, it is even 100% because they decided to monitor through these systems its entire agriculture area. So the integrated administration control system and the land parcel information system ensure the compliance, or the systems for compliance control under the Common Agriculture Policy, and they include inherently spatial information at parcel level. And in addition, we have, I think today, about 15 or so member states which use the automated geospatial aid application. That's then a system which is also driven by remote sensing in order to ensure compliance and refine, so to say, even more with spatial accuracy of the actions taken on the ground. The systems often include mapping of organic source. That's quite important because it's important to know where those sources are. It's a minority in Europe, even though in particular Nordic countries, the area shares are significant, and emissions or emissions reductions from those sources are quite important. And there are multiple opportunities under Copernicus and Copernicus Greenland cover, which is today, so to say, a subcomponent. So I think on the agriculture side, as the system already exists and ensures compliance under the CAP, the similar data could be used by member states for improved reporting on agricultural land for LULUCF. Just another example we have just come across the other day. As you can see, this is Dutch. It comes from a colleague. I don't speak Dutch, but it's basically a system in Flanders on parcel level, giving information about organic soils. A bottom line of this, such systems exist. They distinguish different land uses, and then the organic soil content monitoring over time. So it is possible to have geospatial information on soils and not just on the land cover versus or land use information. So on forests, the situation is a little bit different. Today's systems are heavily based on national forest inventories. In a few member states, we also have national forest soil inventories. These are updated every 5 to 10 years. Varies quite significantly among the member states. Some member states have a, let's say, 20% revisit of sites every year. Other member states carry out the visit of the sites all in 1 year and then update the inventory over at once. So rolling update versus update in discrete intervals. There are ups and downs of both approaches. If you have like an update every 10 years all at once, you often see jumps in the time series, etc. I mentioned before, such inventories are not cheap by any means. Also, one should be clear here, they don't serve LULUCF exclusively. LULUCF is a benefiter of such forest inventories, but they are highly important for the overall forest monitoring, for the environmental monitoring, and for the forest industry. What we propose here is a Earth observation based technologies should be taken into account because they provide the wall-to-wall information, and they are widely used globally for forest reporting. So outside the EU, if you look at greenhouse gas reporting, in particular on forest, you will see that the uptake of remote sensing is much higher. Of course, this is due to the fact that all EU member states have established inventory networks, whereas in tropical countries, such systems hardly exist. But nevertheless, it shows that the monitoring can be done from remote sensing at a much higher temporal and spatial interval. With Copernicus data, I get a complete picture of my EU area or global area every 5 days at a resolution of 10 to 20 meters. And I compare it with Sentinel-1 data, you can get radar information. There are multiple opportunities today. For instance, the Knowledge Center on Earth Observation, which has been put forward between DG DEFIS, DG RTD, and DG JSC. There is the Forest Information System for Europe under the EEA. Also, the Commission put forward in its forest strategy or announced to put forward a legal proposal for a forest monitoring data reporting and monitoring system. And will need to be seen how this will be followed up. But this could be an opportunity to have a ground and Earth observation-based system for improved forest monitoring across the EU member states. On settlements, that's maybe a small category, but nevertheless, from the emissions side, also important. Well, we have different systems. In many member states, the information is captured by the LPIS, LPIS should it read, so Land Pass Information System. Then we have also satellite-based layers. the urban atlas, the high resolution layer for impervious cover. But I'm pretty sure that in most member cases, cadastral systems are updated very frequently, and so could also be used for LULUCF emission reporting. Last slide, I think, on the forest strategy and complementary actions, in particular on this announcement for a legal proposal. So the legal proposal also includes so-called strategic plans to have. So besides the monitoring, it includes the strategic plans to basically provide a overview of envisaged actions and developments in the forest sector at 10, 30, and 50-year time periods. That's quite important because forests develop slowly. So, I mean, you don't have a forest and you cut it off after 20 years. It stands there for decades, if not centuries. Then I mentioned already the FISIS system, Forest Information System for Europe, which exists. This should be strengthened in its monitoring data. And then we have a EU-wide reporting. I dwelt upon this. And fourthly, we also see a mutual benefit for partnerships. Something similar exists for the agriculture. So there could be a European Forest Science Partnership and indicators based on remote sensing and latest research results to assess the sustainable forest management. And with this, I'm done. I'm not sure where I stand in the timing. On this slide, you only see the links to the legal proposal, and this would also bring you then to the impact assessment if you need to know more what is behind the legal text, and to a fact sheet on the on LULUCF and the forest strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, René. The timing was excellent, so that's great start to the event. I would ask my colleague Eva to share the Menti question, and I'd also encourage all the audience. You can freely ask questions via this Menti meter. The chat code is present in the chat, and you can also vote for questions you like. So I'd like to ask René, we received one question. Does the EU overall neutrality target include delocalized emissions, for example, from goods purchased within the EU but manufactured elsewhere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a complicated question. Of course, goes well now beyond LULUCF, because goods can be many things. There is a legal proposal for the carbon border mechanism, and this should then take into account if I understand the correction, and manufactured elsewhere. If a product basically is produced outside the EU, and how those emissions can be taken into account with a rationale that with increasing carbon prices, the product prices of carbon-intensive products in the EU would also rise. Yeah. There is a legal proposal for such a mechanism also put forward among the 13 proposals for Fit for 55 package on 14th of July.
Okay, thank you. Then perhaps you could kind of explain this approach for 2035, the approach for climate neutral land sector. Maybe slightly expand on why this is the logical way to go, and what are the linkages between these sectors? Yeah,
that's a good question, because it's maybe not so clear from the first side if you look at the CAN policy architecture. Nevertheless, maybe you remember the slide on the climate law with this graph where all the sectors decreased its emissions, LULUCF increased. And you remember the red line. That's the key point in the end. It needs to come to zero. So what does it mean? While we have a policy architecture with the emission trading system, with the effort sharing regulation, with LULUCF today, so 3 separate pillars, at least, in the end of the day, it all needs to come under one umbrella. and it is then a first step to put agriculture non-CO2 together with LULUCF, so the net emissions from land uses, under this umbrella, and then gradually to add in the other sectors, because bottom line is that this is the architecture of a climate neutral system. So by 2035, only for the emissions which come from land, of course, over time, also the other sectors, because that's what the climate law says. Why is it logical to start with land? Well, if you look into the reported categories and you look a bit back and forth, what is in LULUCF and what is in LULUCF and what is in agriculture non-CO2, you will see that some parts of the emissions which take place on land, well, actually all parts of the emissions which take place on land are reported in the two different sectors. Manure cows are on land, but its emissions is reported under agriculture non-CO2. Even more so, the fertilizer application which takes place on cropland and grassland is not reported under LULUCF, but reported under agriculture non-CO2, while the fertilizer application which is done on forest land is reported under LULUCF. So it's a quite complex architecture. It depends on which land you apply nitrogen, and you will find the reported values either in LULUCF for, let's say, forest, or for agriculture or grassland and cropland, you find it in the agriculture non-CO2. So there is already today an inherent link, and what the policy architecture has done, or also the segregated reporting between LULUCF and agriculture non-CO2, has drawn a quite artificial line between the two systems, which both take place on land and often the same parcels, because the carbon stock changes on agriculture are reported under LULUCF, nitrogen under agriculture. So both take place on the same parcel of land.
Thank you. We have another question. Eva, if you could perhaps share it, please. So can you explain what are the plans related to LULUCF with peatlands, part of wetland areas, and their greenhouse gas assessment improvement based on remote sensing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Peatland is a subcategory reported under wetland. That is correct. The LULUCF proposal does not say anything specific on peatland, because we wanted to get rid of all these provisions for specific categories, subcategories, really in this regard, simplify the regulation to address the emissions and removals from land, similar for all land uses. So you will not find a specific provision on peatlands in the LULUCF regulation. Nevertheless, I think emissions from peatland can be quite significant. I mean, today, what is the situation is that peatlands are used for energy production. Over time, in most member states, this has been reduced, not to say dramatically reduced in many cases. There is, however, also remaining emissions from for horticulture use, and that is not staggering, but still there, and can be addressed, because it's a very small part of the land one needs to work on. And also not to forget, here you also have emissions from the extraction process as such. The extraction process by the industry, the transport which is involved, etc., etc. So in the long term, I think it should be a goal in the EU to phase out peat extraction. And I think it can be also done, because it's a very local process. But it's not only about so now we speak much beyond what LULUCF reporting and numbers are, but really on land management. it's not just done with, stopping peat extraction, because these emissions would then naturally continue. You need to take action on the land. So it's really about restoration action, in particular on peatlands which still contain a significant amount of organic material. I mean, some peatlands may be depleted in a way that restoration action is too costly for the benefit one would get. But in many cases, it's not just say, okay, let's phase out peat use, but really also to make sure that the emissions are reduced, to the minimum possible. Because as you all know, you can put land on the water, but then you get methane emissions. So there's a careful balance to be struck. But there are good studies overall on these issues in the countries which are affected by this.
Okay, then perhaps we're running out of time, but I'd like maybe a quick answer for one final question. There's a question, yes, thank you, Ivo. What should be advocated for in those member states where LULUCF sector generates more emissions than it sequestrates? Mm-hmm. How to achieve targets in those member states?
Yeah, good question. If you look at the legal proposal and then specifically Annex 2, which contains the member states' target as proposed by the Commission, you will see 4 or 5, I think it's 4 member states which have a positive number. Let me recall who it is: Ireland, Denmark, Czech Republic, Malta, but this is next to 0. And maybe there's another one. And what we have done for setting the targets is to take the current net removal values. Net removal can also have a plus as a sign. And we used the greenhouse, I want to be specific here, we used the greenhouse gas inventory submission from 2020 because this was the latest available data at the time of drafting the impact assessment and the regulation. And we used reported years 16 to 18, averaged this because it's quite common in LULUCF that you have some variations between the year due to some natural events. So an average over a short period seemed appropriate in this case. So this was the baseline, and this adds up to 268 megatons of net removals in the EU, which leaves us with a gap to the envisaged target of 310 or 42 megatons. And these 42 megatons were then allocated to all member states by the share of managed land area, also as reported in the greenhouse gas inventory. So bigger member states need to do more, smaller member states need to do less. Why? Because emission reduction in LULUCF is basically driven by the available land area. If you are not big country, you don't have much possibilities to do a lot on emissions reductions or enhanced removals. That is a basic rationale. So now, if you have a country with net emissions in LULUCF today, you need to do actions. You also have to do a mitigation, but you are possibly then still in emissions. So the situation of net emissions in LULUCF by a small set of countries is then still taken into account, and the additional effort you need to do is proportional to the managed land area for the gap to the target, not for the whole 310.
Okay, then thank you very much, and thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us. And I would now like to invite Ants Lazniņš, the leading researcher at Latvian State Forest Research Institute, Silava, for his presentation. And I remind you that you can send in the questions via Menti. And on this, I will also do these chat reactions 5 and 1 minutes when the time is running out. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me. We are going from global level to local level. The title of presentation is National Greenhouse Gas Inventories for Forest Land, Cropland and Grazing Land, but I will go down to only Latvian inventory, maybe as example of different inventories in this region. I said they're quite the same. It will be some combination of school children lecture and maybe some new things which are coming in front of us from previous presentation actually. And there are two types of challenges. One is inventory, and another is referral to previous presentation about policies related challenges in this sector and how to overcome them. Yep, very simple introduction what it is, land use and land use change in forestry. We have several categories. First is the biggest and most dynamic is forest land. It's different from our national legislation. We are not accounting under forest lands, forest infrastructure like forest roads. We are not accounting under forest land swamps, nurseries, and forest glades. So they are reported in other categories. Then we have cropland, and here is also quite a big difference from what we are considering at, let's say, usually, because under croplands we are accounting also cultivated grasslands where we are doing intensive management of land with regular plogging. Actually, it's very complicated in Latvia to keep agricultural land away from afforestation if you are not doing any very intensive management, which is natural in our climate conditions. Then we have grasslands, which basically are pastures and quite a huge area of let's not use word abundant agricultural lands, but less intensively used agricultural lands for some time, and also forest glades are counted here. Then we have settlements where we put all forest infrastructure and drainage systems, but there is some complicated situation because emissions from these drainage systems are reported under forest lands or under croplands or under grasslands, depending from what they are draining. And under settlements, we are accounting also some artificial forest bodies, but emissions from these water bodies are reported under. This situation is now in this year inventory will be improved, so the land use will be reported in the same place where we're reporting emissions. In wetlands, we are reporting all wetlands, but emissions are reported only from managed lands, which includes peat extraction sites and artificial water bodies. And the drainage systems, as I told, are reported under other land use categories. And then we have a very small and very tiny land use. It's other lands, mostly dunes on the seaside. So there are no emissions, no removals, no carbon in soil. Then we have wood products. It's quite important for Latvia category, and it should be considered bit more careful. Then we have wildfires and incineration of harvesting residues. It's very minor, actually, category of emissions currently, but maybe overestimated in public communication for Europe. But for us, it's really quite tiny. And another tiny source of emissions is greenhouse gas emissions due to forest fertilizing. It's at the moment reported under cropland and grassland, actually under agriculture, because we are not separating fertilizers which are used in settlements or in parks and cemeteries, and fertilizers which are used in agriculture. Then just about carbon pools, so we are going into more details. There you can see green boxes and a bit reddish boxes. Green are those where we are quite sure about information, and the red ones are the boxes where we are using, let's say, research data from other countries, or we are not certain about the data which we are using. Living biomass is the most interesting, of course. We know what is happening with trees and large shrubs from National Forest Inventory. We have quite good biomass expansion factors for these, but we have very limited information about small trees and shrubs and annual plants, especially in forest lands. Actually, in other land use categories also, there is very limited information for calculations of this biomass, and it's not the case of Latvia. And if you're going to remote sensing application of remote sensing methods, if we have these red boxes, so then any kind of remote sensing exercise means garbage in, garbage out, because we are using very uncertain data for calculations. For forest lands also mosses and lichens, so we don't have quite good information what is happening with and the same is transferring also to deadwood. If you don't know what is happening with living biomass, we have quite limited information about deadwood and litter, what is happening with these plants after they are dying or losing some parts. For deadwood in forest lands mainly, we have limited information, and actually I guess not many European countries are counted for natural limbing of trees, which is could be quite big source of CO2 removals in soil in forest, but at the moment it's abundant a bit. It's not accounted, at least in our inventory we are not accounting this pool. For the rest is quite okay. For litter, it's mirror image of living biomass. We don't know much about what is happening with fine roots, with litter from perennial plants, with litter of annual plants, and with mortality of mosses and lichens. So it's topics which goes to challenges side. For soil, we are quite, actually it's funny, but we are quite certain about what is happening with organic soils, but we have a limited information about mineral soils, what is happening with removals and emissions, and yeah, it will follow more explanation. For the main data sources which are used for LULUCF sector in Latvia, as you can see, for all land use categories, nearly for all the national forest inventories, main source of information for living biomass, deadwood, and as a functions also for litter. For harvested wood products, we are using production data from Faustat, or from, in future, we will use directly from national providers. For wetlands, we are using also quite intensively research data because there is quite small areas of managed wetlands, and NFIs to, how to say, the network is not dense enough to provide information on stock on land use changes in these, for instance, peat extraction sites. So we are using research data, and actually remote sensing application, remote sensing is applied here to have to follow up to land use changes in peat extraction sites. Yes, for that's basically, for we are using also climate data for soil carbon stock change calculations. We have some problems with future projections because different projections leads us to different conclusions what to do with our land use, but it's something going to challenge side, of course. Yeah, then nice picture of our LULUCF inventory, how data flows is organized. I guess you don't have to try to follow up all the figures, all the numbers in this picture. There'll be simplified version later. But yes, it's very complicated process at the moment. And every year we have new organizations with wetland reporting. There are more. This not double, but at least significantly increases amount of organizations involved and information to be managed and to be managed so that we are avoiding double accounting or underestimation of any sources. Then yeah, maybe it's quite important because sometimes we are complaining that here in Latvia we are maybe cheating somebody or inventories. We can have some impact on what is reported in inventory, but it would be really complicated to cheat somebody because it's the system for quality control and assurance is quite complicated. First of all, it's National Forest Inventory, which is the main data source, and they have internal system for quality control. It's basically, it's first is 10% of plots are measured, so we know what is rate of potential uncertainties in the field measurements. Then we have internal systems. So if I'm calculating something, then somebody else is checking what I'm doing. And if I'm doing something wrong, that I'm blamed for that, and hopefully things are corrected. Then we have external check by 2 ministries which are responsible for this work, and also by a compiler of inventory. So there are 3 organizations already involved externally and not dependent financially from us, at least for now. Then we have external quality control by, at the moment, it's University of Agriculture. new name of University of Life Science and Technologies of Latvia. We are doing agriculture inventory, and we are sharing these quality controls. We are controlling their quality of agriculture reporting. Then European Commission is giving us some advice usually, and finding some gaps or some mistakes in our inventory. And finally, we have the UNFCCC Secretariat quality control. By every year, they are doing all the inventories checked every year, and then approximately once per 5 years, but not in COVID situation, they are doing in-country review. So, and if we have positive response here last year, it doesn't mean that we will have the same positive response next year, because next year viewer can find that we are doing something we are doing wrong, maybe, or not good enough. So this is to answer the question if we can affect what we are reporting in our inventory. Yes, the basic figures. The basic situation is land use, the main activity data for Latvia, that we are dominated by forest lands, but actually not big change happened since 1990. We have some trend from croplands to grasslands in some time ago. Now it's going backwards from grasslands to croplands. And in future, we consider that the area of cropland will slightly increase and area of grassland will probably slightly decrease, but it depends from payments per area payments for grasslands, if it will remain retained or increased or reduced. There is one publication which is based on our land use matrix calculation. So it was quite significant improvement, but we are going further to switch from periodic data to annual data using satellite images to estimate where the changes and when the changes actually occur on land use. Yes, we are one of those countries which are from time to time in emission side in LULUCF sector. Most probably in future we will be continuously on emission side. But this is what we have from 1990 to 2019. So it's quite stable emissions from everywhere except forest lands. Mainly these are organic soils. In other land use categories, in forest lands, also we are in negative side because forests cannot compensate all emissions from organic soil, and in future it will be a bit worse, I guess, regarding forests. Yes, about forest lands, still living biomass. We have accumulation of carbon in forest lands. There are two charts. In upper, you can see that one trend, which is reducing of removals, but maybe we have to concentrate on the lower chart, where we can see carbon stocks in forests. So they are continuously grow. That's the removals are reducing, but carbon stocks are growing. Another important thing for Latvia and for other maybe Nordic countries, that in general in Europe, harvested wood products is quite minor carbon pool, but for our country and for similar countries, it's a carbon stock is stored with harvested wood products. So if you are changing something in forest management, this pool can contribute a lot to emissions in future, or also for removals, of course. But basically, we have to consider that it's a big pool, which if you're not supplementing it continuously, then it go down and turn into emission side. One chart just to see what we are seeing about future, and regarding the previous presentation about our bright future with LULUCF sector. It's for us, it's maybe not so bright. Basically, we can look at any scenario starting from harvest reduction, which is proposed by some politicians by 30%, or afforestation or other management replacing clear fellings with continuous forest cover management. We can see that everything goes more or less to emission side in future, or except afforestation, of course. If we are increasing continuously forest area, we are continuously in positive side. But generally, it doesn't matter so much what we are doing. We cannot continuously increase removals in forest lands. And yes, this harvest reduction is, if we return to previous slide where we can see carbon stocks, then it would look quite dramatic decrease in future. And we don't know what will happen actually with old forests if you are reducing harvest. seeing situation in Western countries, in Germany, in Slovakia, we can say that it maybe we are underestimating the negative effect of natural aging of forests. Another important thing, it's organic soils in Latvia. It's in previous presentation, it was already mentioned that in our climate conditions, it's quite big thing. Here is comparison in 2018 between energy sector, for instance, you can see an upper chart with the blue box, and total emissions from organic soils in Latvia from all land use categories. You can see that it's quite the same situation. But I'm not sure if you can see many measures proposed for organic soils in compared to measures which are proposed for energy sector to reduce emissions, but the numbers are quite the same actually. And another important thing that here for organic soils, maybe reduction costs are much, much smaller than for energy sector. But yeah, it's just to point your attention that one very big source of emissions is slightly abundant in our policy, energy and climate policy. And again, about the quality of our inventories. Here is one general picture of what we reported a year ago and what we reported this year as net emissions from LULUCF sector. You can see red line was last year, and now something happened and we are reporting more removals or less emissions, how we are treating it as optimists or pessimists. And these inventories are continuously improving. And we cannot say as an inventory producer that we don't know something we will not report this year. We have to report according to best available knowledge. And probably last year we know something less. Now we are more advanced and we can calculate something better. So these inventories are continuously improving. This should be understood that they will change continuously. You saw in previous slides that there's many things which we don't know very well now. And as soon as data will come, as soon as new research information will come into inventory, these figures will be changed and go up or down. We cannot promise at the moment where we will be in 5-10 years at the end of next complement period. So for forest lands, we did not do any significant recalculations, except you can see that last year we have some changes, most probably because we had a different forecast for harvesting for 2018. Now we have actual figures on harvesting, and we have slightly less emissions in this year. So we overestimated harvests slightly a year ago in compared to what happened. And now we go to these challenges for future in forest lands at the moment. The first, as I mentioned, mineral soils is a tricky part. We don't have any more forest monitoring, soil forest monitoring program. It was terminated nearly 10 years ago. So we can model something using YASO or any other model, but we don't have any field-based information. So again, referral to remote sensing methods, we are putting garbage in and we're getting garbage out. So we need a forest monitoring program to be sure that we are reporting and calculating, modeling something realistic and reliable. Naturally, wet organic soils, it's another thing which is coming. We will come into inventories at some point. We have one project ongoing from which we will have information. And also, for mineral soils, at the moment we are treating in the same way drained and non-drained mineral soils, but definitely they are different, and we need information what is happening with carbon pools. We know that both of them are emitting something, but we don't know yet how much they are emitting. We will implement soon emission factors for nutrient poor forest sites, and we will implement also emission factors for nutrient rich forest sites from 2 LIFE projects, which are big lack for, not luck, but big. We are very happy with these projects. Actually, it's from one side surprising, from other side they solved a lot of problems in our inventory. Then we are working on linking the land use data and carbon stock change data, and also remote sensing data from Copernicus to switch from periodic data to annual data in land use change and carbon stock change. Yes, I will show something more a bit later about biomass equations. And I already talked about soil monitoring program, which is missing here quite a lot. About these biomass expansion factors, we have them for forests which are till the maturity age, but we don't know what is happening actually later. The biggest problem is this picture, which you can see in, it's called the left upper corner. We are not accounting losses of carbon due to stem rot or root rot. At the moment, we are calculating all the old trees and rotten trees, just like healthy trees. So definitely in projections in the current state, we are overestimating a lot carbon stock in old forests. Mainly this relies to deciduous trees, but also to spruce stands. And about these pristine or naturally wet organic soils, we know quite sure at the moment. We have several research data, but they are not published, therefore I'm not showing figures, numbers. But currently we are reporting drained and rewetted soils, but we are not reporting anything on naturally wet forest soils. But as you can see, it could happen that we are doubling our emissions from organic soil in future, because somehow they have to be managed. So we have to report, I guess, from forest land, because according to IPCC guidelines. But this is something to do in future. Why we have these emissions? It's quite easy to answer. It's example of chart of groundwater level changes in forest lands. It's, I guess, 40 sites, average from 40 sites. You can see drained gray and naturally wet white spots. So in spring, in April, May to June, in these naturally wet sites, we have enormous, huge emissions of methane, because soil is warm, but still anaerobic conditions, and then water goes down, and we have the same rate of emissions of CO2 from these non-drained sites. So they are actually, should be understood that in forest lands, when we are doing drainage, we are not increasing emissions from soil in most cases, in average, let's say. For croplands, thanks to LIFE16 project, we did significant improvement last year, and we get down to, let's say, we are nearly double, reduced nearly twice the emissions from organic soils, because we used before default emission factors from IPCC guidelines. Now we have country-specific. Next step is model-based calculations. But yeah, thanks to this LIFE16 project, now we have much better understanding what is happening with emissions from organic soils in croplands, and we are not overestimating potential impact of afforestation or conversion to grasslands of these croplands. Things which have to be done, it's again, one thing is going on in another project managed by University of Latvia. It's improvement of activity data for organic soils, climate data, and other parameters of these organic soils. Quite a lot of things is necessary to have calculation reliable. We are missing biomass expansion factors. It's another project which is going to completing stage, but we have to publish these biomass expansion factors for field crops. Then we need to improve also activity data for YASA model for mineral soils to be able to calculate information on a field, single field data. At the moment, we are going to quite interesting results if you are just blindly using models. Then one important thing, if you are trying to go to single field level, it's yield differentiation equations, which can be done using Copernicus data. Definitely, it's one way to apply these remote sensing data for calculation of carbon input in soil. And one big problem is use of organic fertilizers. We don't have information, good enough information where and how many fertilizers are used. For grasslands, actually the same improvement based on LIFE16 project. Again, we are reduced a lot emissions from organic soils. And another thing we can see is that the transformation of croplands to grasslands is maybe it's reduced emissions, but it's not a big thing for if you want to reduce emissions from organic soils. It's actually the only way to significant reduction is afforestation of these areas. And quite the same improvements are necessary as in cropland, so I will not go deeper into this. And about political challenges, yeah, for period 2030-2020, which we are just now finalizing reportings, we have quite dramatic requirement for reduction of emissions, 16 million per year. It's not realistic, but now we are luckily to possibility to make technical corrections. This number is reduced first to minus, I'm missing, minus 4 million, 4.5, and now we recalculated to minus 3 million per year. So it is more realistic figure according to requirements of calculation. The problem with these 16 million was that we didn't have good methods and we relied on other modelers by GRC actually. And, we were not able to say that it's wrong. We didn't have figures at that time, but now it seems that it will be quite good and we will be able to implement these targets. For 2130, you heard already previous presentation what is waiting us, and for 2021-25, it's another one story. We have some commitments in grasslands and croplands. We have commitments for forest management. We don't have any commitments for wetlands and settlements. So it's quite on safe side for these two land use categories. We don't have to close our peat extraction sites till 2025 at least. And if you're looking to what is our projections, if we will be able to fulfill these commitments, then yes, the greenfield shows that we will be able to do it because of CO2 removals in forest lands, and because the organic matter in croplands and grazing plants is decomposing and area of these organic soils is going down. And compared to 2005-2009, which was this reference period, the area of organic soils is reduced significantly. So thanks to these two things, we will fulfill these commitments. Regarding 2630, it's proposed by European Commission. Yes, I hope this proposal will not be implemented from one side. From other side, as a researcher, I would be happy if it is implemented because it's not realistic. Therefore, for Latvia at least, therefore we have to spend a lot of money for research, for studies to understand how we can fulfill this target. But from other side, maybe it's hopefully it will be more reliable target at the end. And again, we hope for the technical corrections will be implemented in a good manner because we don't know yet quite a lot of our emissions from our, especially forest lands and as well as for other land use categories. But the goal for Latvia is to have a net removals minus 5 million tons during this period. If we are able to reach this goal, no, we are not able to reach this goal if we are not doing anything. Most probably we will make 11 million tons more emissions than we have.
Sorry, Anis, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we should try to move on to the
that's right. Yes. Okay. This is regarding these new targets. So for Latvia, it's quite complicated to reach them, and I guess we can stop at this slide. It's where we are with currently proposed measures and the measures which are the situation with emissions in future.
Thank you, Anis. I wanted to share two quick questions which we received in the Menti chat.
I will stop sharing.
Yeah. So Eva, could you please share them? The first question is, how large is the margin of error for national greenhouse gas inventories?
I guess we are not using term error, it's uncertainty what we are saying. It's a bit different thing, but for national inventory together with LULUCF sector, it's in last year it was 26%, and without LULUCF sector it's 5%. So uncertainty of LULUCF sector is quite big, as you can imagine.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question is, you referred to the improvement of water regime in forests. And then is it only artificial drainage, or sometimes irrigation or re-wetting of drain wetlands can be considered?
Regarding drainage, yes, it is the most efficient offer we can provide for forest side. Of course, we have to consider other functions of forest ecosystems. But regarding re-wetting, it's complicated to say. One thing is clear: if we have high water level in spring and autumn and low water level in summer, we will have a lot of emissions from this side. If we have flooded area, don't know yet what is happening in flooded areas. Definitely, they are remaining emission source, but how big, it's hard to say at the moment. We are using default emission factors for flooded areas right now.
Okay, thank you, Hans, very much. Our next speaker will be Inese Suija-Markova, who's the leading researcher at Latvia University of Life Sciences and Technologies. Just a reminder, you can send in your questions via Menti. The chat code is, the question code is in the chat. And for the speaker, I will give the chat reactions 5 and 1 when the time is running up. So 5 minutes for 5 minutes and 1 minute for 1. Thank you. Inese, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you. First of all, I would like to apologize for these noises that you might hear during my presentation, as we are having construction works ongoing in our building, and from time to time these noises might happen. I hope this will be not so many times. Anyway, today I would like to talk about field measurements that are carried out in agricultural lands, and to share a few examples what, how and why we are measuring in agricultural fields. And overall, I will have 4 examples where we have carried out greenhouse gas emission measurements in agricultural lands. So the first example will be about mineral and organic soils, and what results can we see from measurements at 2 types of soils. So the second example will be about conventional and reduced soil tillage operations and different crops. The third one will be about application of digestate from a biogas plant using 2 different pieces of equipment, and what can we see directly after the application of this material on the field. And the fourth one will be a brief insight in one of our measurements carried out using acid together with pig slurry. So the equipment we are using in all of our sites and at all of our experimental setups is the Picaro G2500 gas concentration analyzer. So basically we are measuring concentrations of nitrous oxide, methane, carbon dioxide and ammonia directly in the field. And we are using chambers which are connected to the equipment. We have these air sucked into the unit and measured its chemical composition. And this unit allows us to simultaneously and continuously measure concentrations of these gases. So we can do measurements at whatever time span we would like to, and then based on these measured concentrations, soil flux are determined using a linear model incorporated directly in soil flux processor software developed by Picaro. In addition, we also measure soil conditions in terms of soil temperature and soil moisture to see the differences what these factors have on the results. And also we measure air temperature directly in the chamber, as it is also necessary for calculations of emissions. And so here we come to the first example. So we are doing this study already for 5 years. And in this map, you can see where these sites are located in the map of Latvia. And I would like to pay your attention that 2 of these sites are in organic soils, which are Mārupe and Laflore, and then Bērze, Melupīte, and Daudze are in mineral soils. And here you can see a map of one of these sites where, besides the field and the place where we measure emissions of gases, you can see also water quality monitoring site. And in this case, we are joining together greenhouse gas emission measurements with water quality sampling. And this is done also in Melupīte and Daudze research site. And also what I would like to show in this map, that we have a very detailed map of subsurface drainage systems, which we are using in determination of catchment area for a specific sampling site. And this is how Melupīte drainage field look like. Again, we are having this specific drainage system and water sampling site and measurements of greenhouse gases. Similarly, also in Auce study site. And then these were mineral soils, and then in Laflore, where blueberries are grown. You can see also that there are open ditches that drains these lands to be utilized for growing blueberries. And then we have a Mārupe research site where these organic soils are operated in conventional mode by seeding and harvesting the different agricultural crops. And then in this case also we have a different kind of aspects, blueberries, where soil disturbance is minimum, and then we have a traditional agricultural practice also in organic soil. And when we come to the results, it's not a surprise that in Mārupe, where soil is disturbed the most, and we have organic soil, we have the highest emissions of nitrous oxide almost in all years of our studies. While in Laflore, where these blueberries are grown, there you can see that also these emissions are relatively low, and also they are more similar to the mineral soils. And then we go to the next gas, carbon dioxide. Here you can see situation is slightly different. We have somewhat higher emissions from these 2 organic soil sites. However, also one of our mineral soils, Melupīte, also is close by similar emissions. Also, what we can see if we perform measurements several years continuously, we can start to see trends. And for example, here in the Melupīte research site, you can see that there are a somewhat downward trend in emissions of carbon dioxide. For others, maybe these trends are not so obvious. When we come to methane, you might notice that we have also negative values, which indicates that for this gas, soil acts as a sink for methane, and only in some cases we are having these emissions. And what is interesting that again in a Melupīte research site, we are having an opposite trend as we had for the previous gas. We have slightly increasing trend regarding the methane gas. You can see also from this graph that there are sites where these concentrations vary among years of studies. And then, for example, in Laflore, you can see that these methane emissions are somewhat similar in a quite narrow range. And then when we go to ammonia emissions, these are again quite low, I would say. In all cases, there are not so pronounced differences as it was for other gases, with slightly more extremes in these organic soils. Obviously, if we would take out these outlying values, we will see more detailed situation about these gases. But anyway, I would like to emphasize that still overall these data sets are quite similar and with some extremes. And then when we come to the factors that affect emissions, I would like to pay your attention on those values which are statistically significant. And in this case, soil moisture tends to positively correlate with emissions of CO2 and also ammonia. Then for soil moisture, we have again a different situation. Then nitrous oxide and methane correlates positively with soil moisture. So in this case, you can see that the different gases react differently to the soil temperature and soil moisture content. What else I would like to pay your attention to is that CO2 emissions correlate negatively with emissions of methane, and this indicates that if we reduce emissions of one gas, we will increase emissions of another one. And in this case, this shows that if we even apply different practices to reduce one gas, another one most likely will increase. Although these correlation coefficients are not so high, but still they are statistically significant and thus showing the trends in general. And then in one of our research sites, during the 1 year, we performed also studies in experimental plots where different nitrogen fertilizer applications rates were used, including 0 to 240 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. And here you can see that there are slightly controversial results, but the trend in relation to groundwater level is rather clear. If we have a water level closer to the soil surface, we will have more emissions of nitrous oxide. In contrast, for the carbon dioxide, you can see the opposite situation, that if groundwater level goes deeper below ground surface, we can see increase in emissions of this gas. Again, different responses to groundwater level for two gases measured. The second example will be about using of conventional and reduced tillage operations and different crops. So this study is performed in training and research farm of our university, Peterlauke, which is mineral soils. In this map, you can see that this is again subsurface drainage site where we have these drained agricultural mineral soils. And in this site, we have 24 experimental plots established and used for these for different purposes, not only to study emissions of gases, but also from the soil properties perspective. And by conventional soil tillage, we understand the traditional plowing at a depth of 20 to 22 centimeters, while reduced tillage is using discs at a depth of 10 centimeters. So basically it's not no-till, but it is a reduced tillage. And then we have different crops and also, of course, controlled application of mineral fertilizers according to specific requirements of specific plants. And then when we come to conclusion, to the results, we can see again, we will see these graphs showing the results. And here I would like to show that there are no so to say obvious differences among crops that are grown during this during the 4-year study period from 2018 until this year. And what else we might take a look, that there are also no dramatic or obvious differences between conventional and reduced tillage. In some cases, these median values show a little bit higher emission rates for reduced tillage rather than for conventional. And then when we go to carbon dioxide, situation is quite similar. Here maybe slightly lower emissions for this gas we have for barley and beans, which both are summer or spring sown crops, in contrast to winter wheat and the winter rapeseed, which are seeded in winter, in autumn in previous years. So that might also be a factor affecting emissions. And then methane emissions, again, negative values. So it's similar to the previous research site and the results measured there, that methane is in most cases is captured by soil, and only in some cases we have methane emissions. And here also you can see that among these crops we don't have very pronounced differences in terms of emissions. And then we come to ammonia, and also in here median values are very similar for all crops and also for both tillage conditions. So then we eliminate the factor of crop, and we have emissions of gases by not taking into consideration the differences in crops. And here you can see that when all of these data sets are combined together, we have in each year a representative graph, and you can see that in most cases emissions of nitrous oxide is slightly higher than for reduced tillage rather than conventional tillage. I assume that many of you would think that it will be another way around, but 4-year measurement results shows results which might be somewhat surprisingly. Then carbon dioxide, again, these graphs representing each year of measurements, conventional versus reduced tillage. And in here, again, in most cases, in all of the years, we have higher emissions of this gas in in reduced tillage of plots rather than in conventional. For the methane situation is, I would say, very similar, except that here median values are almost the same, and we don't see any specific trends in the case of methane, except that again we are having in most cases this uptake. And when it comes to ammonia, situation is varying among the years of study. If you remember, then 2018 was rather drought year. And from this perspective, I don't have the time to analyze in such a great detail, but what we can see from our measurements that overall also moisture conditions in terms of precipitation also plays an important role in emissions of greenhouse gases and ammonia as well. Then the third example, when the digestate from a biogas plant was applied in the measured Ciruli farm, these measurements were carried out only once in September 5 in 2018 and April 7 in 2019. And setup was similar, so we had different machinery. And here you can see when this digestate was applied close to the soil surface. And then directly after, measurements have been started directly in the field using a slightly different chamber because the small one was not possible to use in these circumstances. And this is how it looked like. And then in 2019, we had a different piece of equipment and applied in spring. And you can see this is a more broad application of digestate, and that most likely affects also the results for for emissions of gases. And here you can see the results. And in 2018, when the digestate was applied close to the soil surface, we can see that again we noticed emissions only after 24 hours of applications. After that, we have that these emissions are negative, which are referring to uptake. And then in next year, when the broader application was used, this is more of what we would expect, maybe in terms of results. Directly after the application, you can see that these emissions of nitrous oxide are going down, and then in time they are reduced and go to the negative value already in 4 hours of measurements. Then for carbon dioxide, again, after the application, you can see that we have increase in the emission, and then it decreases in time and then reaches the status quo or the reference measurement before application in 24 hours. Next year, the similar conditions, you might think that it's the same graph, but no, it's just the same trend. High concentration in time of application, and then it decreases in time. Unfortunately, in this case, we didn't measure it within 24 hours of after application. Then for methane, again, these emissions are very high directly after the application. Also, in case of application with the tubing close to the soil surface, and then it goes down almost already in 3 hours after the application. And similar results were also achieved in 2019 with a broader application. And again, in 3 hours, these emissions of methane come to the almost status quo. For ammonia, slightly different trend. We have increasing trend until 2 hours, and then afterwards concentration started to decrease. In 2018 and 2019, more of what we would expect, then increase after application, and then slightly decreasing in time. The last example is where we used also pink slurry digestate with and without acid. And here application was similar to what we have done in the measured theory research site close to the soil surface, and similar setup again. And then the results were not so much surprised. So the emissions of ammonia hereby presented, you can see that the highest emissions we had directly after the application in all cases, but when the acid was added to this digestive material, then the concentrations were much lower in time of application rather than it was without acid and without vegetation. So basically the best options in this case showed that pig slurry with acid and with vegetation showed that the lowest emissions of ammonia. As you may think, we would have a much more detailed results to be presented, but in this case I just wanted to provide brief insight of what we can do with our measurement unit and what are the main results without going deep in the statistics and the details. So thank you for your attention, and I am open for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Inese. Excellent. Then we can move on to the questions. Eva, could you please share the Menti site? In your talk, you mentioned that you have also sensors that provide continuous measurements. So here is the question where no such sensors are available. So what are your thoughts on greenhouse gas flux value interpolation in case of low temporal frequency and manual monitoring system?
Yes, this question reminds me of that I didn't mention also, not everything is so shiny about the use of this piece of equipment. So we have also limitations, and those are related to air temperature and obviously also precipitation. We can measure only when the conditions are favorable for that. And usually we perform these measurements during the time period from March to September, maybe in beginning of October, but we can't measure these emissions in when the temperatures are negative. And what I also didn't mention, so we are in each time of measurements, so we are having these measurements for 400 seconds, and we are using 3 chambers also to increase reliability on the monitoring results of these measurement results. So I hope that I somewhat answered to the question, but in one case we also compared the results measured by this manual monitoring system and the system that we are using this Picaro, directly measuring gas emissions in the fields, and obviously those were different, and I can't recall either those have been higher or lower, but anyway, they were not the same.
Thank you. And then the other question was, what do you think, should the negative CH4 emissions in soil be included in the greenhouse gas reporting schemes?
Of course, I would like to suggest to take it into account, obviously, because if we have emissions, then we need to report them. But if we have a sinks, so then I assume that it would be only fair to report also uptake as well, and show that in many cases these emissions are not taking place, and we during some certain time periods we have also this uptake or sink. Yes, obviously we would like to expand our measurements on different circumstances, but that would be more of a question to the policy, maybe making stakeholders or the funding agencies for that support our activities in terms of greenhouse gas measurements. Obviously, we would like to test the effects of different greenhouse gas emission reduction measures, and in our case, we have tried it with tillage and reduced tillage, and definitely we would be open to any other, to test the effects of any other mitigation measures that we consider to be implemented in agricultural fields. And tillage and no tillage is only one thing. Then we come to different sources of fertilizers, also different land uses, and many other aspects in terms also of timing of fertilizer application, source and amount, and there are many aspects. And if we decide to implement some of these measures, I would say that there would be need also for measurements to provide scientific based results on how these can affect emissions overall.
Okay, great. Thank you, Inese. Then I'd like to complete this part and then move on to Aigars Lavrinovic, who's our researcher at the Institute for Environmental Solutions. So, Aigars.
Thank you, Robert. So,
Aigars, can you please put the full screen?
Yes, I am setting up. So now.
Great, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Aigars Lavrinovic, and I'm the researcher at the Institute for Environmental Solutions. And today I'm going to talk about field measurements of the greenhouse gas fluxes, and it will be based on the practical experience that I and my colleagues have obtained during the LifeCraft project. So, but first, let's remind ourselves a little bit, why do we need to measure the greenhouse gas fluxes? So the estimates by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, in its 5th assessment report, show that the land use and land use change and forestry sector is responsible for 20 to 25% of the global GHG emissions. And it is estimated that globally, the soil contains about 1,500 to 2,400 gigatons of CO2, which is about 2 to 3 times of the amount of the carbon in the atmosphere. And the balance between release and storage of carbon in soil is crucial to maintain the climate balance. And the different scenarios that predicts the carbon neutrality by the middle of the 21st century, they all rely on the capacity of forests, grasslands, and wetlands to store a portion of the CO2 emitted. So to keep track on the GHG emissions or sinks, the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Kyoto Protocol, they are required to submit annual inventories of all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions from sources and removals from sinks. So the IPCC offers a methodology for the greenhouse gas flux estimations, and this methodology is classified in tiers that, or in levels that vary in complexity and detail. And the problem here is that often, the relatively simple tier 1 methods for the GHG flux estimations rely on emission factors or coefficients provided by the IPCC. And the problem here is that often these factors are questioned and challenged by the scientist community. And then the more complex methodology under the tier 2 or 3 comes in, where which involves direct measurements in the fields for more accurate greenhouse gas flux estimations. And this approach becomes interesting as there are no globally accepted standards for the GHG flux estimation from different land use activities. So then in the further presentation, I'm going to look at current practices in the greenhouse gas field measurements in different land uses, or more particularly in agriculture. Also, what are the possible improvements for the field measurements and what can we expect in the future? But first, let's take a quick look back in the history. So it is known that the first CO2 emissions from soils were performed in laboratories in the 19th century. And the first field measurements with chambers were introduced at the beginning of the 20th century. And this is the first known scientific report from Henrik Lundgaard about where he reported his study on CO2 emissions using a chamber system, which dates back to 1927. And determinations of other trace gas emissions started later as gas analyzers became available. For nitrous oxide, it was in the 50s. And again, this is one of the first known articles about nitrous oxide emissions from soil. And for methane, the measurements started even more later in the 80s. This is one of the first articles where methane emissions from rice fields are reported. And well, today there are several methods available for determining the GHG fluxes from soils, which can be grouped by the tools that are involved and also by the scale to which they are applied. So I will try to shortly explain or tell something about each of these methods. So laboratory methods involves an in-depth examination of a soil sample in a controlled environment. That is, in the lab, we can take the sample from the field and determine how one single parameter is affected by one or few conditions. And we can also exclude other conditions that would be impossible in field conditions. For instance, using this method, we could tell how soils from permafrost regions emit greenhouse gases during the soil thawing process. Next is the chamber systems, and for these systems there are many variations used, determined by the specific conditions that needs to be monitored, and also the desired sampling frequency. And there are many different chamber designs, like closed or open or manual or automated or static or dynamic, but I'm not going to explain it in detail. And this method is the preference for relatively small territories, that is for up to 50 hectares, and they are useful for fragmented territories where we want to compare the different conditions. And more about one example of a chamber system use I will tell a bit later in a second. And then for larger territories, that is 1,000 hectares or 10,000 hectares or more, and that are uniform, such as grasslands or forests, the micrometeorological or station or the eddy covariance towers are used, which are basically, well, alongside the common meteorological parameters, the concentrations of greenhouse gases of interest are recorded, and after automated data processing, the greenhouse gas flux estimations are provided at a very high temporal frequency. But this is a relatively expensive method, and the cost of a eddy covariance tower can reach up to 300,000 euro. Process modeling is another way to estimate the greenhouse gas fluxes. In most cases, they use data such as soil, agrochemical properties, land management, vegetation cover, and so on. And often the remote sensing data are also used for greenhouse gas flux modeling, ensuring a high spatial and temporal resolution. But we will have presentations on remote sensing data used for greenhouse gas estimations. So let's wait for that. And as you understand, that the choice of these methods are mainly determined by the scale, the activity performed on the fields, and also the target that we want to achieve. And these were also the key factors for choosing a greenhouse gas emission or greenhouse gas flux measurement method for a project we carry out at the Institute for Environmental Solutions. It's the project Climate Responsible Agriculture for Latvia. So among other activities in the project, we are measuring greenhouse gas emissions in a field where controlled drainage system is installed. It is known that the controlled drainage has a positive effect on soil. It improves its fertility, reduces soil erosion, and improves the water retention. And these positive effects also result in less greenhouse gases that are emitted from the soil. It is, well, theoretically, it should be retained in the soils. So here we have this location, which is located in Mendele. It is near, I think the largest inhabited area is close to this territory is the village of Mendele or Madliena. It's between those two villages, quite in the middle of nowhere, but well, whatever. And it's about in total 45 hectares. And as you can see, these land plots are there are like 6 land plots which are studied. 3 of them are the reference territories with a conventional drainage system. Those are the ones with the red line around them. And yeah, one here, and there's another one. And right next to the reference plots, there are another plot where the controlled drainage system is installed. And to detect the difference in the greenhouse gases emitted, we have installed the drainage system, and on both land plots, we manually collect the gas samples using a closed chamber systems. So we manually collect the gas samples, and the samples are later analyzed in the laboratory, and using the chambers, we are achieving larger concentration of the trace gases over time. And from the lab results, we are later able to calculate the gas fluxes, which are expressed from a particular area during a particular time period. So this is it's quite a simple method, but it works well for the needs that we have in this project. We are able to compare 2 land plots with different drainage systems in terms of greenhouse gas emissions as we collect samples at the same time of the day using the same method. And here are some preliminary results only for the carbon dioxide though, but you can see there's been already 8 sampling campaigns, and we can just tell that from one land plot the emissions are this and this much. On the other land plot, which is like one is the reference, one is the controlled drainage system, the emission is different, and we can just tell what is the difference for one or another practice. We can't analyze any weekly or diurnal trends or monthly trends, but that's also not the goal of this project. And the sampling campaign have just started. We have some more data which are not processed yet, but here the data from this summer, we can see, we can't really make any conclusions yet about how effective is the controlled drainage system when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, because this summer was quite dry and there was hardly any drainage to control, let's say. The main shortcoming of this our chosen approach is the low temporal resolution versus the labor intensity. So to collect samples in these 45 hectares, it takes about 10 hours of time and 25 kilometers to walk. And as a result, we obtain 6 values of greenhouse gas emissions. To improve the efficiency of our monitoring routine by increasing the temporal resolution and by reducing the labor hours would require extra costs. It's probably wouldn't be solved by automated system as the fields are actively managed. And one possible improvement would be a use of portable gas analyzer, but as we found out in the previous presentation that, we also are aware of that, it has a limited use during the cold seasons and especially at negative temperatures. But one thing that we know for sure is that setting up a greenhouse gas field monitoring system is a way of expressing our creativity, and creativity is one of the main drivers for science development. And in the context of greenhouse gas emission measurements, it is always possible to think a way around the obstacles, such as expensive tools for data gathering, like it's with the eddy covariance system, or expensive sensors for nitrous oxide detection, or commercial automated systems that would be used in hardly accessible and remote areas. So that's why the scientist community is working on different improvements that are not specifically targeted to greenhouse gas emissions, but they can be used there. So first is the emerging scene of developing new types of sensors, which could eventually provide an affordable low-cost tools for GHG detection and flux measurement. And well, just some examples on which direction these sensors are developed. It's mostly using new materials that would significantly decrease the production costs, later the cost for the end user. Another improvement which we can see in action and being used for greenhouse gas emissions is the automated system development, which provides also high temporal frequency, and those are often combined from, let's say, some commercial components like the gas analyzers, and they are combined with custom-made setup for gas sample collection, which can be made simply from items found in a DIY store. And again, there are in the publication database, you can find so many interesting examples about such case studies. And also, well, another improvement is the improved process models, which kind of excludes the necessity to visit the field so often. Very but very emerging trend is to use the machine learning algorithms for indirect greenhouse gas emission evaluation. And this approach, well, it uses other data that are linked to the greenhouse gas emissions, but are more easily obtainable, such as the soil water table level, soil moisture, temperature, climatic data, land management, and vegetation type. And moreover, the machine learning models often incorporate remote sensing data, increasing the spatial and temporal resolution. And yeah, so example, but yeah, in the future, I think these previously mentioned trends that are going on today will also impact the way we measure greenhouse gas emissions in the future. So the future trends, I think those are lower cost because more and more DIY solutions will be used and less commercial setups will be incorporated in the monitoring. And also the newly designed gas sensors will make the process more affordable financially. Also, it will result in less manual work. Those won't be hours and days to obtain little data, as the automated systems of monitoring they are developing at the moment. And also the indirect measurement of the greenhouse gas fluxes will become more and more popular based on the machine learning algorithms and the data that we obtain from remote sensing tools. And I think ultimately these future trends that I just mentioned will will ease the process of standardized greenhouse gas measurement protocol development and establishment for like global standard. So yeah, that's all from my side. And now I'm ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, Igors. Great. Then please share the Menti screen. Thank you, Ieva. So we have one question. Do you think that the development of process models and remote sensing techniques can completely replace the field works for greenhouse gas flux measurement?
I think not entirely, because those models and also remote sensing data need to be validated with data from field. So you will still need to carry out at least some field measurements to validate those models.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. As we were comparing these different types of sensors, do you have an opinion what could be the ways to compensate the data gaps for greenhouse gas flux monitoring at low temporal frequency?
Okay, so in our project in LifeCraft, we also have thought about ways how to fill the gaps between the measurements we perform in the fields. Those are, the gap is like 2 weeks or 4 weeks in the cold season. So yeah, data interpolation might be one solution. I have seen or read study reports where indirect measurements such as measurements of soil temperature, soil moisture, and the climatic data are used to model or interpolate the CO2 emission values when they are missing. So I think that's one way to compensate the data gaps, but how useful those data are, or the quality of these interpolated data, they highly rely on the data you obtain for the model or the interpolation model input data. So not always they can be useful. You have to, it might be a matter of investments for data obtaining.
Okay, it seems that at this point we don't have any more questions, so I'd like to invite the next speaker to share their screen, Frédéric Chevalier, the research scientist at Climate and Environment Sciences Laboratory.
So I'm going full screen. Yes, so do not hesitate to interrupt me. If the sound goes bad, I will try to change things a bit. Indeed, I'm in the French countryside with a poor internet connection. So, so today I will discuss the road towards robust estimates of the net AFOLU CO2 exchange over time on a country scale within the Copernicus Atmospheric Monitoring Service. So I'd like to thank my colleague Richard Engelen from ECNWF, who's the Deputy Director of CAMS, for providing quite a lot of the slides that I will present. I have merged them with my own results from the CAMS 255 service that I'm leading. The CAMS 255 service is one of the services within CAMS, and this one is dedicated to atmospheric inversion. AFOLU stands for land use change, and forestry. It's basically the combination of LULUCF and the agriculture sector. So as you may know, for most of you, Copernicus is the monitoring program of the Earth maintained by the European Union. It's mostly, but not only, but mostly based on satellite data. Among the satellite data, it's primarily based on the Sentinel series that is initiated, developed, maintained by the European Union. All this data from the sentinels, from other satellite data, from EU, or ESA, or from other space agencies like NASA or JAXA, they feed into value-added services. It's not just one system, it's a series of systems, the atmospheric system that I'm speaking about today, but also the climate, the land, marine, the emergency and the security services. So far, what has been discussed today in this workshop has been mostly related to the land service. Here we are taking the viewpoint from the atmosphere. It's a different point of view. Basically, all the emissions, they end up in the atmosphere, they are merged, and they affect the observations of the atmospheric composition that we can make from satellite and from in situ measurements. And from this data, we can try to analyze what this data says about the input signal, the input emissions. So, atmospheres in the CAMS, it's made of global systems, like the one that is illustrated with the map here, with these fine structures of an atmospheric tracer. These data feed into regional systems. This is the case for Europe, but it could also be for other parts of the world. And both the global system and the regional systems, they deliver specific products targeting different publics. You have here an illustration for solar radiation and a number of images for air quality. Air quality is a very important component of the CAMS, but it's not just about air quality. It's also about, for instance, greenhouse gases. This is written here with words. You can spot here the global atmospheric products, regional products, the air quality emissions. So that's a bottom-up approach with emission factors, supplementary services, mostly about radiation, but not only. And here the CO2 service elements, greenhouse gas emissions and fluxes. Within CAMS 1.0 that ended last year, this part, the CO2 service elements, they were part of the supplementary services. So you see the growing importance of the CO2 service. On top of that, or here at the bottom, to support it, we have a very ambitious and diverse evaluation and quality control system. Plus, of course, in input, you have the observation data that we acquire. And we have a number of components that target users for proper and large user uptake. It's the expert panel that analyzes the fitness for purpose. We have user support, communication, user engagement and training, etc. So it's a full range of services, but also the interface with the users, so there is a good user uptake. So within this large system, maintained, developed, or managed by ECNWF, we have this atmospheric inversion subservice where we map greenhouse gas fluxes over the globe from atmospheric observations. Greenhouse gas fluxes, it's CO2, but also methane and N2O. I'm illustrating it here with the time series of the ICOS measurements. So ICOS is the network or networks of greenhouse gas measurements from the surface and from the atmosphere in Europe. You have two stations that happen to be in France, but we have data all over Europe. So time series of in situ measurements, but also satellite data, and using sophisticated chemistry and transport models and a Bayesian framework, we revert the sign of time in a statistical way to map the sources and sinks of greenhouse gas fluxes over the globe. So far, we have been focusing on natural fluxes. We assume that the fossil fuel fluxes are perfectly known, so that allows us to extract the natural component. but we hope in the future, I will come back to that at the end, we hope in the future to extract the fossil fuel component specifically as well, or at least some of it. So two types of data that are input to our systems: the satellite data, atmospheric composition, of course, in this part of the service, and the in situ measurements. For the in situ measurements, we have been using them for many decades now. Some of the data record that date back to the 50s, and we have a long experience in handling this type of data. That's not the case for the satellite data that are more fresh, and the experience is very recent. We've been struggling for 15 years now. The first publication dates back from 2005, and it was a failure. We reported a failure using satellite data at the time. For various reasons, it has been a very hard road, but the situation has changed now. I think from the whole community, we have managed to make meaningful, to extract meaningful signals from the satellite data. And I'm illustrating this here with a sentence from last year's global carbon budget. So that's an annual synthesis that is published by the Global Carbon Project. And last year it was mentioned that satellite inversions were submitted to the synthesis, but their results at the larger scale discussed in that synthesis did not deviate substantially from their in situ counterparts and are therefore not separately included. I mean, this sentence was not possible. It would not have been possible to write this sentence 2 years before. So that just illustrates how far we are coming from. There is no evidence anymore that CO2 satellite biases systematically drive the atmospheric inversions. And it's up to the point that the satellite results look even banal. It's not worth in this paper. It's written that it's not worth showing them because it's the same story than with the in situ data. I would tone this down a bit. I think it's less obvious for existing instruments other than OCO2. OCO2 is an instrument from NASA, and I believe it's the best one available right now. And the learning curve may be a bit steeper for the other, or less steep, I would say, for the other instruments available, but we have a good margin of progress. So with this various input data type from satellites and from in situ installations, we infer the fluxes of, in particular, carbon dioxide over the globe. We have a Bayesian inversion, we have a Bayesian system, so that allows us to have the uncertainty of these maps that we provide. This is represented here with these dice. So it's a huge data set of maps of CO2 sources and sinks, plus the uncertainty. To compare them with UNFCCC AFOLU numbers, we combine them with a country mass, so that's quite banal. We also have a map of managed lands that is quite rough, and we hope to improve it in the future, but it's not easy because each country within UNFCCC usually does not deliver the maps of what it considers as managed lands. It explains what it has done with words, but there is no possibility to know exactly which stands have been considered to be managed and those who have not been managed. We also combine our data with lateral fluxes from crop, trade, and rivers. We process for that end, we process data from the Food and Agriculture Organization, spatial proxies, also climatologies for rivers driven by measurements. And combining all this data together, we estimate the national AFOLU flux, and we also have the uncertainty embedded in the approach. So here, that's the main result of our work so far. We have here time series in 5 countries of group of countries: Brazil, Canada, China, DR Congo, and the European Union. We have time series that go back to 79 for the blue curves. That's the CAMS surface-driven inversion. So you have the time series from 79 up to 2020. We also have in orange for the last 6 years, the satellite-driven inversion. So that's using the NASA CO2 satellite. We also have the 1 sigma envelope for each time series from CAMS. And in green, I have reported the time series of the UNFCCC numbers. When it's a continuous line, it's an Annex 1 country, and when it's dots, it's a non-Annex 1 countries with softer reporting requirements. The messages that we can take from this figure, it's a busy figure, I see, but basically we see that the 2 CAMS inversion seems to be consistent in the sense that the error bars overlap. So you see for the last period from 2015 until 2020, we have a good overlap of the time series. With the green curve, we have a partial overlap. It depends on the country. But what is striking, of course, we have periods where there is no overlap. Look at Canada, for instance, around 2010, so the last years and the end of the noughties. A bit for EU as well. So some periods with no overlap, so a systematic difference. But also we have time series that are much smoother, much more constant relative to the CAMS inversions, much more constant in time. With the exception of Brazil, you can see, for instance, this bump around 2005 that is likely attributed to changes in deforestation. And you have the same bump in the UNFCCC numbers reported by Brazil and in the CAMS inversion. So for that period, that's the surface-driven inversion. There are 2 reasons, to my opinion, that explain the differences between the green and the other curves. The first one is that, as was explained earlier this morning, the national forestry inventories have a slow revisit time of 5 to 10 years, and that dramatically smoothes out the signals. For instance, if you have an El Niño year, you can hardly see it within these inventories. The second reason is that there is a focus, a specific focus within the UNFCCC reports, a specific focus not only on managed lands, but also on managed signals. For instance, and prominently, Canada excludes every year, excludes stands that are managed, that they think are possibly managed, but with a very strong climate signal. So on a year-by-year basis, the map of managed lands varies, and they really target the stands with a strong human imprint. That's not what we have with the CAMS time series, with maps that are constant from year to year. And I think this explains a lot of what we see here, comparing the green and the blue or the orange data. So here, 5 countries or groups of countries. We have the same with 5 others: India, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, and the USA. We currently, so with the same, basically, it's the same type of comparison, the same lessons learned. We currently do not go for smaller countries or groups of countries because the resolution of our systems does not allow meaningful inversion at this very small scale. But I will show the road forward and the hopes that we have to address smaller countries or groups of countries. Focusing on the comparison between the two CAMS time series, we assume the two time series are independent from each other to a large extent because they are driven from very different data. Surface data with a medium constraint, I would say, and the satellite data with a huge constraint that removes most of the prior information that we have in our system. So two time series that are to a very large extent independent. So independent, we have 60 points of comparison because we have 10 countries or groups of countries over a 6-year period. The correlation between the two inversions is of 0.5, so it's not exceptional, but it's not too bad either. And actually, when we when we account for the uncertainty, the Bayesian uncertainty, we see that we have a reduced chi-square of 1.1, so it's very close to 1, and it shows that we are statistically consistent between the two time series. Also, the ratio of variability of the time series between the surface and the CO2-driven inversions is of 0.9, so also very close to 1. We are also very happy about this one. So to summarize a bit what we have in-house, on the right, we have the in-situ driven inversion that is schematized here with a flask. It's a very simple representation. There is a large number of assets for this data because it's very mature technology going back to the 50s initially. So stable, robust technology, measurement technology, also processing technology that is very well handled. Historical record, so it's very important. We can go back to at least the 80s. It's harder for the 70s because we have very few stations. There is redundancy, which means that when something goes wrong at one station, we can use the other stations to compensate for the biases introduced by something going wrong at one station. We have an amazing temporal density. We don't even exploit it to the maximum because we exclude the time of the days when the boundary layer is too shallow. We don't care about whether there is a cloud above the instrument. We are independent from sunshine, allowing us to have data even far north in the winter hemisphere. We have a direct link with the WMO measurement scale, and also it's a pointwise measurement. We exactly know spatially what we measure. Actually, all these assets from the in-situ network are cannot be ticked by the space component. It's not a mature technology. It's a technology in progress. I would say it's TRL maybe 6 to use a vocabulary from the industry. It's a very recent record. It's a homogeneous record, which means that if something goes wrong, it's the whole globe that goes wrong. But of course, it's easy to process because everything has been processed the same way. We have no temporal density. It's not all weather. We need to have clear sky. It's not independent from sunshine, and we have no direct link with the WMO scale. And also, it's not pointwise. We have an integrated column with an uncertainty in the vertical weighting. But we have an amazing spatial coverage with the satellite data, an amazing spatial density with very fine structures that we can see and that we think have value at fine scale. And most of all, it's rapid downstream, we can have data very fast and we can generate downstream services because everything has been centralized within the satellite processing. So I would say that the satellite, just because of this capacity of generating services, of generating the downstream services everywhere over the globe, the satellite data is winning the game somehow, not in terms of quality, but again, it's in terms of capacity to generate services. And the surface network is partially rearranging itself to support the space component. The space component needs the surface data. It needs the surface data for evaluation at all parts of the data processing. It cannot live without it, but the surface data is now supporting it. In particular, for the near future, we hope to have still a good margin of improvement in the type of product that you can provide. We have exascale supercomputers coming in a couple of years. So new supercomputer infrastructures with accelerators like GPUs that will allow us to access a huge and amazing computing power. In parallel, our transport models are being redesigned to have dynamical cores that will benefit, that will exploit to the maximum the new infrastructures. We have new input-output systems that will avoid the current bottleneck that we have in all transport models, I believe, to read the data, the atmospheric data from the disk, and write some of the data that we need. And that will allow us to have scalable models that can catch up with the resolution of numerical result prediction. You can see at the bottom two maps. It's just the same one, but with a zoom over Europe. It's a map from the ECNWF CO2 forecasting system that is run at 10-kilometer resolution. So it's a forecasting system that does not include inversions, but you can see the resolution that we achieve here. It's roughly 10 kilometers with amazing details that you can see. And what is interesting with this 10-kilometer resolution is that we come very close to the resolution of the satellite data. I'm giving here an example of the CO2 satellite. It's an orbit of CO2 that flew for this particular date west of a Chinese city, Anshan, and you can see here the red spots that correspond to the plume of CO2 exported from Anshan with the wind flowing out of the city and crossing the satellite orbit. So here we have patterns of a few kilometers resolution, and with this type of resolution from the models, we come very close to it. So our ambition with the inversion systems is to reach this time of resolution so that we can exploit the maximum of what the satellite data can offer. It's more than that. I think what I'm describing here is one important bridge, but it's not the only one, towards the new Copernicus CO2 monitoring service that the European Commission is preparing, and that should fly, I would say, within the end of the decade, so starting maybe 2025, that will integrate all CO2 related data from the observation world, but also economic activity, models, etc., with new satellite data, in particular the CO2M satellite imagers that the EU and the ESA will launch in 2025, 2026. All of this information of various nature will be integrated within a unique system that will deliver specific products towards a wide range of public, of course, government and policymakers to help them in their decision making. the industry to help them understand what their emissions are, the scientific community with a huge amount of new data, original data, and the general public. So with this, we hope to make a real breakthrough, in particular in support of the Paris Agreement. With this, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. I'm very, very happy to say that there were no connection problems. We could hear you all the time, and the sound was very nice. We have one question from Menti. I think you already kind of answered it during the talk, but perhaps you could reiterate some of the key points. So how do you see the development of satellite data contribution to greenhouse gas inventory in the future? And what is the main value provided by this?
Yeah, the satellite data, as I tried to explain, is, it may be a bit pejorative, but it's not a mature technology. It's and this is also what is exciting about the satellite data. We are trying to find solutions to observe CO2 and CH4, of course, but here it was about CO2 from space, and it's tough. It's tough to an extent that was not met before. For air quality, for instance, if you observe, say, carbon monoxide within a 10% uncertainty error bar, then you're already happy. You think, okay, well, I have some good information. If you observe CO2 with 10% uncertainty, it's just useless, because we know already CO2 just with a couple of stations and a few models within a few percent. So we want to have data from space about CO2 to an amazing precision. It's about precision, but also it's about systematic errors. The challenge in terms of methodology are just amazing, never met before. And this is also very motivating for the scientists and also for the space agencies. There is a real frontier there. Currently, there has been a number of solutions that have been designed, but they are not fully satisfactory. We hope in particular to address the contribution of other scatterers, aerosols in particular, clouds in a better way in the future. CO2M will have a specific aerosol instrument on top of the CO2 instrument. So CO2M, it's this Sentinel satellite that will fly in 2025. Microcarp, it's a French-British mission, will have another spectral band. So it's a cheaper solution, not a full instrument, but a new spectral band that was not used before. So hopefully with these developments and also new detectors, we will be able to have satellite data that reach the needed precision. We think that we have it roughly with OCO2, but OCO2, as was illustrated with the figure that I showed, it's a very narrow swath. If we want to observe the plumes of CO2, we want to have a large swath. This is what will be achieved with CO2M, but with a technology that is slightly different. So an amazing imaging capacity with new detectors. We hope to have this kind of information, but still, as I explained, the surface data will be needed to tune the satellite systems to provide useful information. So I hope this answers this question.
Yes, thank you. Great. So obviously satellites can help, but we need also data from the ground. So thank you for the presentation. I'd like to now invite Ali Nadir Arslan, who's the senior scientist at the Finnish Meteorological Institute, to share the screen. And again, questions can be asked in Menti, and I will show this chat reaction 5 minutes and 1 minute when the time is running out. Thank you.
Okay, I was trying to do unmute myself, and you can see me myself. So I think, are you able to see now the full screen? No. Okay, now you see.
No, we still see it in the
Okay.
editing mode. Yeah, now it's full screen.
I think it's coming probably. It will take time. Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks very much for invitation. It was very interesting so far. I've been listening from the beginning, and that's why actually even I added some slides based on the different talks, and which I thought that it will be interesting. So let me check the time. Yeah, I'm working at the Finnish Meteorological Institute as it was introduced as a senior scientist on Arctic Space Center. My expertise on mostly in remote sensing application, especially on crossphere. Actually, the last presentation was very good. That it will be somehow my presentation will somehow touch on that work has been presented, and also the question has been asked in the last presentation: what is the added value provided by satellite data in greenhouse gas inventory? So hopefully my presentation will give some information, some clues on this matter issues. So I try to hide my screen that I can see my presentation. So today I'm going to talk about the project entitled the Developing Support for Monitoring and Reporting of Greenhouse Gas Emissions and Removals from the Land Use Change and Forestry, LULUCF, basically. So this just shortly where this project has been funded. So basically, this is the FP-CAP project, which is started in 2018, which is led by the German Eurospace Center, funded by European Commission. Actually, the Rene Goltis was the funded organization, funded EU partner, which has been presented at the beginning. So it was good to see him also here. And FP-CAP is one of the specific part of this user uptake strategy in the Commission related with the Copernicus Programme. And the FP-CAP, this project has been implemented as a work program, annual work programs. And this action, which is all projects are actually considered in the work program as action. And this action, which I coordinated and I'm going to present, is this. It has been in the 2019 work program, and then almost coming to end on the technical part. And we are now writing the final reports and final administration issues in this project. And more information actually can be found about the FP-CAP consortium, which is the 48 partners, including from 23 European countries. I believe also in Latvian, I'm sure that there are also Latvian partners in it, as I know the people from there. So you can get more information on this website, which is given here. In this specific action, so we have 9 partners from 6 member state countries, like Finland, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Spain, Poland, and Ireland. Basically, objectives are given here, but if I summarize quickly the objectives, that the idea was that to get this, the added value, actually the question was very good to summarize this, what is the main objective, added value, what kind of added value we can get from this, not only satellite data, but the remote sensing in the greenhouse gases inventory reporting. So basic, and also to support the member states in the monitoring and reporting of the greenhouse gas emissions and removals from the LULUCF. It is also, we also aim this, because this is the user uptake, Copernicus user uptake, the framework. So our secondary objective was also engage with the stakeholders who is dealing with the greenhouse gas reporting, the entities where this remote sensing, specifically Copernicus, can be implemented or can be used in this greenhouse gas reporting, LULUCF reporting. And here we have basically carried on this some pilot studies, and we explored some kind of the solutions based on this some Copernicus data. There are basically, of course, there are many outputs and result indicators has been listed in the project, but here I'm just mentioning that there will be 3 reports has been planned, but 3 deliverables, which is the one report with available methods and data sets for improving the current existing LULUCF methodology and regulations, and a report on technical needs in regions within member states, including guidelines, and also technical report detailing a standardized pan-European approach in support of member states and European Union LULUCF reporting. So what has been basically work has been carried out, which is listed here. So we first reviewed the European Union inventory system, QA and QC currently employed at the national level by member states, which is the participating member states, which is the 6 member states, which is listed here: Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Finland, Ireland, Poland, and Spain. And then we look at this European Copernicus data for national LULUCF reporting, which kind of data can be implemented for this national LULUCF reporting in this consortium, of course. And then there has been lots of efforts on the user engagement in these member states, and we have test cases in selected nodes in these partners countries, which is the 6 countries here listed. We prepared some solution and methodologies for use in national LULUCF reporting, and also we have some addressed some implications of Copernicus products for LULUCF reporting. Overview of technical requirements of reporting greenhouse gases emission and sequestration and LULUCF. We also prepared some kind of technical needs and guidelines in regions within Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Finland, Ireland, Poland, and Spain. This was the part of the user engagement practice. And also looking at this, once we have the solution and methodologies for this LULUCF reporting, we also look at this solution, that which of them can be used as a potentially pan-European approaches in support of member states and European Union LULUCF reporting. For me, it is impossible to put this all here. So what I have tried to do is that I select some of the examples of which is touching this, most of the work carried on here. But of course, this presentation aiming that just to inform you that what has been done in this project, what is coming. So then, of course, it will be. I'm very happy to be answered or being later on contacted to get detailed information on this work, on this action or project, let's say. So basically, according to 2006 IPC guidelines, the quality assurance and quality control system, which is implemented for the greenhouse gas inventories, consists of an inventory agency responsible for coordinating these QA/QC activities, and then QA/QC plan and general QC procedures, which is the T1 source category specific quality control procedures Tier 2. I think this has been already addressed in the first session of the presentation. So basically, QA/QC plan is the basic element of the QA and QC system, and then the plan outlines the QA/QC activities that are implemented and includes the scheduled time for inventory preparation from its initial development through the final reporting in any year, and it contains an outline of the process and schedule to review of all source categories. So basically, why I'm telling this, which is very familiar to you, that so we have looked at this in this, what is this current practice of these member states which has been participating in this consortium. So I will be just give these two examples of this. The others can be found in the our delivered report later. So let's see if I'm able to get another slide. Yeah, so here you see our Bulgarian partner, the schematic diagram, their QA/QC procedures. Just an example to you. I think it's a complicated one, but this is the important. I think it was also shown the Latvian, the QA/QC procedures. So this is just shows that I think it's important to understand these procedures to get this remote sensing data, how this remote sensing data can be utilized and provided, and then how these procedures can be updated. So basically, this is just an example in Bulgarian case that they have these responsible institutions, data collection, preparation of inventory, and category-specific quality control procedures, and so on, which can be seen later from my slides. And then I have, of course, this from Finland, so I put also the Finnish, the national system for greenhouse gas inventory. So basically, here that there are the administrative data sources, and then there are institutes are responsible, which is the Finnish Environment Institute and National Research Institute Finland, which is LULUCF and SUKE, and then there is this advisory board on top of it. So there are like inventory and QA/QC process of Finnish greenhouse gas inventory, which is the official statistics of Finland. So basically there are this inventory and quality planning, inventory preparation, inventory evaluation, and then conclusion and improvement. So there are like four like cycle, like plan, do, check, and act, and then continue to improvement. So objective that ensure the implementation of the QA/QC plan and high quality submission, then verification procedures, and then also summarize in a memo of each sector. So these are the just quick examples. So this is what we have done first in the project. We review first is what are this QA and QC and QA systems in the member states that in the consortium. Then we have look at this. What are the Copernicus products which can be used or which can be utilized, available for this LULUCF reporting? So one of them is pan-European high-resolution layers. HRLE provide information specific land cover characteristic are complementary to land cover land use mapping, such as in the Korean land cover data sets. So this HRL's products produced from the satellite imagery through the combination of automatic processing and interactive rule-based classification, and it's available this since 2015 based on this time series of satellite images from several different sensors, including both combination of optical and radar data. And then now currently, of course, the Copernicus program has been initiated, and the main source now is since 2018 Sentinel satellites, which is the Copernicus satellites, European satellites, and particularly Sentinel-2 and Sentinel-1. Yeah, I don't want to go further detail of this. I think it's now what is important here that what are the available satellite products, specifically Copernicus related products, are available for the LULUCF reporting, which can be implemented. So another one is S2 GLC and land cover classification approach has been developed in the frame of ESA project, Sentinel-2 Global Land Cover. And here, these all classification steps and processing of satellite and auxiliary data are performed using the software developed by CBK PAN, which is the partner of our project as well. In the final land cover resolution in 10 meter by 10 meter, you can see the references for the more information. For instance, here on the right side in the picture, that land cover Europe 2017 has been performed using this S2 GLC approach. And also, for instance, an example, this S2 GLC approach is improved in 2020, starting from 2020, Polish Space Agency classification, Poland land cover 2020 was performed. So another product which has been also mentioned here, that European current land cover data has been produced since 1990, and from 2000 onwards, every 6 years. For instance, the data consists of the 44 land cover classes with the minimum mapping unit of 25 hectares of aerial and minimum width of 100 meters for linear phenomena. And here another our partner to show you that an example that where can be how it can be used, and more details can be found in our reports. That, for instance, they use this Google Earth engine to classify land cover from 2000 to 2020. So the products they use Sentinel-2 for the image classification development of time series, Corinne to assess how appropriate Corinne is for inclusion in LULUCF inventory, and Lucas, which is the land use and coverage area from survey, has been used for validation of image classification, and then high resolution layers also to use to assess how appropriate for inclusion of LULUCF inventory. I mentioned that we also conducted these pilot studies, which is our partners, these test cases in different nodes. So here you can see that different partners representing different member states, their selections of the tests. In Finland, we have been used this all country as a full the test case area. So here I'm just starting giving this some kind of the solutions that has been addressed in or prepare or look at in the action. So I've been going through a few of them. For instance, here is in Finnish case, comparing land use areas reported in the greenhouse gas inventory to the Copernicus land data. So the aim was that to compare the areas of IPCC land use classes reported in the greenhouse gas inventory areas produced from various Copernicus data sets in order to see what are the differences. So here you see below that the Copernicus land monitoring service-based data sets were put together. So, they were like a Finnish national high resolution current land cover, which is the 20-meter raster data. And the other one, the global land cover produced from the Sentinel-2 images by the Polish Academy of Sciences. And global land cover produced from Sentinel-2 images, but the high resolution layers, and also the high resolution layers plus European current with the 25 hectare. So I don't go more details. So this is the IPCC classes, and these are the different products representative of different the products. I think that could be looked further. Here is that some results of the comparison from this. Hopefully you can see the colors here. So basically there are some differences, there are some similarities. So cropland, grassland, wetland settlements. So different category, different classes. So, but I think we can, if I go further, you will see maybe more the better understanding, like greenhouse gas emissions and sinks. So basically, some comment like there are different classes like forest land, cropland, grassland, wetland, and then land converted to settlements. So just few conclusions are here. Basically, Finnish high resolution, this Korean land cover are produced slightly higher net sink for total forest land, and notably lower net emission for cropland than greenhouse gas inventories. And in grassland and wetlands, there is a differences in levels, but trends are more or less similar. The category lands converted to settlements shows the difficulty to detect land transition with the high resolution Korean land cover data. So basically the area in this category is in the greenhouse gas inventory twice the size of the changes detected from the high resolution Korean land cover data. So there are differences, there are uncertainties, of course, in the system comparison. So some conclusions from this work, I mean this specifically the study in test case in Finland. So classification according to IPCC guidelines is possible to withdraw from the Copernicus Land Monitoring Service data. More in national institute data is required, such as soil information. Peat extraction areas are not included in the old data set examined, and most Copernicus Land Monitoring Service data doesn't provide time series long enough. And challenges in comparing data from this the both like inventory and the Korean land cover. Reclassification into IPC class is not straightforward because of differences in the class definition, source data, grassland, forest, cropland, wetland, and settlement. So there are challenges to solve. And the area data need to be linked appropriate carbon stocks and emission factors. When the area estimates and carbon stock changes are estimated based on the different data sources, there is a risk to break this linkage. For example, forest land areas estimated from Korean land cover data and 3 biomass stocks from this national forest inventory data. So, and then there are more, such as producing chain layers for the whole time period is a challenge. Like possible use of Copernicus data identifies, such as comparing changes from one class to another, and real-time land use data from satellite imagery could provide the data for independent monitoring system of the national greenhouse gas inventory process. And there are some gaps identified. I mean, we have all these gaps identified in all these different cases and different member states, but this is specifically the Finnish case I'm talking. So you will get more this type of information in our reports, which we provided. Like doesn't provide data to identify small or rare occurrences in land use and land use change, and more data needed on wetland, soil moisture, flood areas, a lack of biomass data from forests and other land classes. So this just to show you that what kind of work has been carried and what kind of results has been provided. Since previous presentation related with the CAM fluxes, and then also actually it was Frederick was saying that they would like to do this practice in the smaller scale. I think I just put some slides here to show you that we have done this or studied some in Finnish scale. So top-down estimate of CO2 fluxes. I want to go very fast because these are just edit. I know that the time is running. So basically, the modeling atmospheric, the CO2, so the sources and sinks like biospheric, anthropogenic emissions, fires, and ocean has been taken, and there's this atmospheric transport data assimilation, and then there's this observation and measurement has been used in the data assimilation. The sources and sinks concentration has been produced. Here you see this the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service CAMS global CO2 top-down estimates. It was in also in Frederick's slides. So I basically total flux from CAMS for EU region is systematically smaller than reported emissions, and on EU scale the model version concentrated with the satellite observation, which is the NASA. Which OCO2 has been mentioned in the previous also Welter model constrained with institute measurements. Regional differences between EU can still be large, also there's this mention, and in here we studied the CAMS CO2 flux over Finland, which was I believe is a good continuation of a previous presentation. So here, like you see this year 2019 total flux in left in situ and right satellite. So basically, the notable difference in the annual total CO2 flux between CAMS in situ and satellite inversions. So the reasons has been explained for the biospheric fluxes, specifically flux between May July periods show differences. A joint analysis with the land cover data has large uncertainties due to the model's coarse resolution. This also has been one of the drawbacks of the models as compared to the land cover data. So resolution has been improved in several other models products. Here the focus is Copernicus model product. So satellite observation have advanced notably in a short time. In addition to models, development of methods is necessary for a direct satellite data-driven evolution of the carbon fluxes, which was also, I think, the future plans which we have seen in the Frederick slides. So here, just I think, give just somehow tastes of the work. A joint analysis of novel atmospheric satellite observation and land cover classes in Finland. So basically, this is the 1 kilometer resolution land cover, 1416 classes. The European Korean land cover was classed using the principal components of the 8 clusters. And some results, like we see that the solar induced fluorescence, which is the SIF, from NASA CO2 satellite has been proven as a powerful photosynthesis and GPP proxy in the multiple studies. So SIF data was here analyzed in land cover classes, and it has been found that clear difference between clusters, in particular the dominantly agricultural land cover show a higher and earlier SIF signal than the other classes. So based on this work, basically SIF is seen as a promising data set for the evaluating the changes in the photosynthesis and carbon sink of different land cover types. And here my colleague in FMI that developed methods also for direct application for CO2 and methane satellite observation. However, the role of atmospheric transfer is significant, which complicates the interpretation of emission signatures. So I just wanted to add these slides, which makes me more nervous because the time is running. But I wanted to add this since it was a good. I thought that it would be good to the first presentation as a contribution. So here, our Polish partner in the project has been choose the test case in the Podlaska the ship area, which is seen here. And then here they compared with the high resolution data with 2008, high resolution data with the national inventory, which is the responsible entity COPIZE. And here you see in 2000 comparison between these using different classes. Like a cropland, grassland, that combination and separately and so on. I think I need to go further. And there's here the 2015. So here is you see the combination of this comparison of the different areas in this 2012, 2015, 2018 with the different classes. Here again, like water, settlements, and wetland continues. So here you can see the preparation of land cover classes in different, the institute type of inventory measurements and also the high resolution data. So they look quite good results actually, which will be reflected here. So Copernicus land monitoring service products, in particular high resolution layers, are promising for wall-to-wall inventory for LULUCF. But of course, the adjustment of the high resolution layers to the national requirements and definition of land use is essential. And integration of information from high resolution should be preceded by deep analysis of greenhouse gas emission and removals methodology. Quality and accuracy of high resolution layer must be taken into account. And of course, verification and correction to the land use changes are needed. I'm not going, I'm sorry, I think I'm late, but can I have a couple of minutes more to continue or? should I go directly to the conclusion?
Yes, you have a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Okay, so here I just wanted to show lesson learned from Finnish case. So basically, I think this is somehow it's good in the what has been presented today. So this is also has been lesson learned. We have reported in a different partners and different member states. So basically, it was tested how well Corin data fit existing field data collected by National Forest Inventory Project. The difference between the land use and land cover was clearly observed in forest lands. And there were large differences in peatland forest areas. And also regarding the croplands and especially grasslands, there were large differences between National Forest Inventory and Corin. In Finland, land use changes are often small by area less than like 0.5 hectare. So observing these small areas is challenging. And also it was mentioned before that the soil database was missing to the Corin cover. So that has been merged in order to get this information on mineral and organic soils. And of course, these estimates on uncertainties for land use categories are needed. So I will not go details, but this is also we have in our project this French subcontracting, which is by FMI. We also look at because this was also important part in this I think seminar, linking the field measurements and sentinel images, linking the field measurements to the satellite data was important. So that's why we have looked at it in this issue by the subcontract and the INRA-A that like it was that idea was linking field measurements with the satellite image and modeling to reduce uncertainties in soil carbon stocks and greenhouse gas emissions. So here I will not go detailed, but I will just show this one, just the test case, test size. There was a carbon stocks in 2005 and 2014. And then here the temporal dynamic of these stocks in the 0-30 centimeter. The idea was in this study, in this task, that can these changes be predicted from the space? So this has been now finalizing, so it will be also reported, will be available in from our project. Finally, I would like to advertise that we have now we will publish this. All this work has been done in this special issue, which we now you see here, and of course we are also accepting the similar work to be published, similar work to be submitted to this special issue. So the deadline is 30 November here, but actually it will be extended. So I welcome to, especially the next presentation, I think related to it will be good to get also contribution from your LIFE project to this special session. Sorry about the delay. I thank you for finishing my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. It was a lot of worthwhile information, so it makes sense to slightly go over time. We have one question in Menti about the practical use of Copernicus data. So maybe you can say which country could be considered as a good example or a pioneer that already uses a lot of satellite data in greenhouse gas reporting.
This was it's of course I'm the project coordinator, and it would have, of course. We have this Bulgaria, Poland, Ireland, Finland, and Spain. And of course, Bulgaria is just starting. And we have also addressed these gaps and status of, we have organized this, the stakeholders meetings, and we have seen their procedures. So it looks like that Finland, Ireland is quite in a good shape. But also the Spain and Poland, obviously, it's also they have a lot of work because there are a lot of developments. So basically, the member state, the partners where representing member states are quite good. That's why actually we have selected this been selected as a partner in the consortium. So I will say all, but of course, specifically, I think Finland, Ireland has been, and Poland has been shown as, or Spain. I mean, I cannot say which one is better, but they are good, yeah.
Okay, and then maybe a small follow-up to this. If there's this large gap between countries, like some countries are not really using a lot of remote sensing data, but they want to get there, how long do you think the process is between while the capacity is built up to actually start implementing these satellite solutions more?
Yeah, exactly. So basically, for us as a Finnish case, we were very lucky because LULUCF is basically doing this work for the. I mean, LULUCF is doing this. Statistics of Finland is the responsible entity for the greenhouse emission. But then, of course, in Finland we have system that Statistics of Finland are different entities are being working on this. So in that respect, LULUCF is the main responsible entity. So it was in our project. We have subcontracted them, so they are it's a long way because there has been lots of things should be addressed and done. I cannot say that, I mean, the time frame and how long does it take, but that's why we have been also address these technical guidelines, how these methods can be implemented and what should be done. In that respect, we will be also identifying these gaps and how this, with the guidelines, how should be implemented. No, it's difficult to answer your question, of course, because it's based on the resources, based on the stakeholders, their attitude. So it's a bit, but now maybe with the RENE presentation and this commission initiatives, maybe this process will be faster. I think there are some regulations will come, maybe this process will be faster, which I hope.
Yes, thank you. Of course, and then when we have results from different projects, then we learn from one another and we can build faster. So thank you, Ali, for the presentation. I'd like to invite my colleague Inese Suija-Markova, who's a leading researcher at the Institute for Environmental Solutions, for the final presentation of the day.
Okay, hello. I hope you see the presentation in show mode, yeah. Okay. Okay, thanks to introduction, Robert. My name is Inese Suija-Markova, and I'm leading researcher at the Institute for Environmental Solutions. And thanks for also very interesting previous presentations. And this presentation will be some kind of follow-up to these two, but with some Latvian case studies. In this our project, we try to look at Earth observation data, available data products, and to see how they can support the GHG inventory here in Latvia, analyzing available data and looking like what kind of other data products we can offer as essential climate variables. And if looking at the pilot territory, our pilot territory was Vidzeme region. It's approximately 1/4 of Latvia. There are four regions in Latvia, such as, and we were particularly looking at the agricultural lands. And here you can see also where agricultural lands are located, and also the statistics of agricultural lands, statistics from Rural Support Service database. And what we can see that half of the agricultural land is occupied by grasslands, 39% are permanent grasslands, and 11% are cultivated grasslands. And then there are different crop types, from which dominant ones are winter wheat, summer wheat, oats, summer barley, rye. Basically, there are both summer and winter crops. And if you're looking at land cover classification and as essential climate variable, then and different classes, then we can see that in such countries as Latvia, we know quite well where and what is located. Basically, if we're talking about agricultural lands, then it is well known by Rural Support Service as farmers are registering their activities in these databases. But if we are looking at whole land cover, also here in Latvia, then the main data products, what we can get are available data products are from Copernicus Land Monitoring Service. Here you can see Korean land cover map for 2018, and there are also available these high resolution layers. And as you can see from statistics, half of the land is covered by different type of forests, and then agricultural lands and grasslands cover approximately 28%, something like this, close to 30. And if we are looking at the available data and the gaps or drawbacks of this available data, basically the main drawback is that is temporal resolution, because Korean land cover data layers, they are updated every 6 years. High resolution layers, they are updated now every 30 years. But what we can learn from requirements for GHG inventory, then there is need for annual land cover assessment, and also assessment of changes in land cover. And also, if looking at the resolution, then for example, Korean land cover has this minimum mapping unit of 5 hectares. Higher spatial resolution is in case of high resolution layers. In this case, it's like 20 meter per pixel or 10 meter per pixel, which is, I believe is sufficient for inventory. Basically, also this 5 hectares is quite sufficient also if we're talking about inventory. And as it was already mentioned, there is like available different satellite data, and there are 2 main satellites for land monitoring, which are available from Copernicus data. One is Sentinel, 2 optical, and Sentinel-1 radar. Basically, the difference is that it is much easier to work with Sentinel-1 data because it's optical satellite with also spectral information. You can map land cover. You can also see the changes, assess vegetation health, biomass, and so on. And it's quite useful instrument, but the main drawback, especially in northern part of the Europe, is frequently cloudy sky, and you cannot use this data for some kind of very frequent monitoring. Even if the data is acquired like every 5 days, actually you can get maybe one image per month and so on. In this case, what we can say that if you are looking for annual mapping or for seasonal mapping, then Sentinel data is sufficient. But if you are looking for something more frequent, then you should look at radar data, which is something more difficult to work with, and you should deal with more noise. And in our previous studies, what we did, we tried to learn how we can map land cover. Here you can see classes, and they correspond to the ones which are required from IPCC guidelines, like agricultural lands, grasslands, also forests, and also what can be easily mapped from spectral data. It's peat box, and also especially like peat extraction sites. We can track peat extraction activities quite well from spectral data. And in our previous studies, we saw that it's quite easy to get accuracy about 90%, especially if you have your local reference data. For example, in this case, we just gathered available reference data from agricultural lands, grasslands, from monitoring, from basically different services which update their own databases. We use this data as a reference. And here you can see comparison between Korean land cover and improved classification, which can be done in each country. And we saw in previous result that also there are other examples from other countries. So they improve such classifications. And basically, the detailization is higher. If you're talking about accuracy, I would say Greenland cover already. If you're looking at accuracy, it's quite high. I would say it's often like 80% or something like this. But of course, the main drawback is that you have updates only like once every 6 years. Similar is with the high resolution layers. But in this case, you can get annual mapping of land cover, and also look at land cover changes. This is example from our project. In case of grasslands, we can see the difference in grasslands. If we're talking about the grasslands and the agricultural lands, I would say that Latvia and other similar countries were in the situation, and for example, we know quite well where agricultural lands are located and what's happening in them. And basically, just to track changes in agricultural land, you can use simply rural support service database in case of Latvia. But for example, in case of grasslands, it's more difficult because not all of the grasslands are registered because of it. And especially, it depends what you understand with the grasslands. In this case, we understand this as grass type vegetation, which is not disturbed during whole observation period. And we can see that there has been increasing grassland cover. Quite similar results what we observed also from reference data. And when we were looking at this particular class in grasslands, here you can see some kind of analysis of errors, classification errors, but actually these commission errors, these are not registered grasslands. Basically, it shows that while mapping grasslands using your reference data, for example, in this case from rural support service, then you can get like whole picture about the extent of grasslands. And omission errors on the opposite side, there might be some errors, especially in border pixels, etc. But sometimes they show some kind of violation of what was expected. For example, in this case, with grasslands, we understand, as I already mentioned, grass type vegetation, fields, areas which are not disturbed during observation period, but from this reference data, we can clearly see that these particular grasslands, they have been some kind of mistakenly registered as grasslands, but actually you can see they are by themselves, they are like agricultural and arable lands. In this case, what we saw that such kind of classification we also can use for cross-check of grasslands, trying to spot places where these plowing events have been occurred in grasslands, and to understand like then further just provide information to understand like why it's happening. So if it's like some kind of error in registry or other issues. And if you're looking for a higher resolution mapping of plowing events, and radar data is very nice. Sentinel-1 radar is a very nice instrument because it provides you with data with every 6 days. And as for example, here in this image, you can see from these grasslands and agricultural lands, these are more like grasslands where there are these plowing events or disturbance of grass cover is occurring, and also you can see like how long then these areas are not covered with vegetation. And we also published results on separability of mowing and plowing events in cooperation with Kappa-Zeta. Kappa-Zeta is an Estonian company which is specializing in radar data processing, especially in radar data coherence, and they already has existing service for mowing detection, which is provided to Estonian institutions who are interested in agricultural land monitoring. And yes, what we saw that radar data is quite useful for mowing and plowing detection separation. In this case, coherence data was used, but we also have seen that backscatter data from radar also can be used for plowing event detection. And in this project, then further we understood that there is no need for such high frequency of observation. There is interest more to understand, like for seasons, for example, there is like spring season, autumn season, where different management activities are happening in agricultural lands, and trying to understand like in which season, which fields become bare. Basically, there are plowing or tillage actions are happening, resulting in like disturbance of vegetation and basically bare land appearance. And in this case, I would say optical data is still enough for such seasonal approach, and this study was based on purely optical data. But still, you should deal with seasonal changes in vegetation indexes, and in this case, we used like grasslands as a reference, and we were looking like at some kind of variation of these vegetation index values from grassland level, and then we developed such bare land probability index, which shows basically what is the probability that land is bare. For example, here you can see one example with summer wheat. With summer wheat, it means it has been it has been like plowed during spring and planted, and also there is like it looks that there has been plowing events happened in this field also in autumn of the previous year. Different situation can be seen in winter wheat, which has been planted during the autumn. It means like soil preparation is happening during the autumn, and then we don't see this plowing event anymore in the spring. But later, of course, we can see follow up, see like what's happening in this particular field in the next fields, and this bare land appearance also is visible. And here is example from grassland, typical permanent grassland, where you can see that this bare land occurrence is like a really probability is really low, and sometimes such spikes can signal as mostly like these mowing activities, I would say. And here is a mapping result for this region, basically seasonal mapping of bare land appearance in agricultural lands, and in autumn, and then later in spring. And such product can be prepared for each season. And another variable what we were looking at was understanding the productivity of grasslands, of biomass. And here is example from our previous study. We studied how we can assess biomass from spectral data. We were looking at separate satellite images and then combining together, because in case of grassland, biomass changes by itself. It's like developing of vegetation during the season, and also mowing events when biomass is removed. And in this case, with biomass, we understand like the maximum biomass which is reached in this particular grassland. Basically, it can be also called as like productivity of particular grassland. But in this particular case, we were looking at this more simpler approach, because what we even further saw that these models, when you are predicting biomass, specific they're quite specific to the region, and if you're looking for more stable model, then we changed this classification to this predicted productivity classes of grasslands. We saw that there is possibility to separate grassland productivity in 3 classes. Class 3 and 4, these are quite productive grasslands, and basically spectral data is saturating. You cannot separate 2 of them, but at least you can separate grassland productivity in such 3 classes. And of course, as I demonstrated before, on one hand, you can understand like where grasslands are located, and further you can classify their productivity, and then also you can monitor activities that are happening in the grasslands. If you are interested in some kind of assessment once per season, once per year, then optical data is okay. But if you are looking for higher frequency, like once per week, to understand like when mowing activities have been performed, then you should look at radar data. And yes, to summing up this, of course, we have these available data products from Copernicus land monitoring service like our inland cover and also high resolution data layers. What we saw that the main drawback is maybe not the accuracy, but I would say the actuality of the data, because we see that there is a huge improvement from one data product update to the next one. I think in the future it will be better and better, and I believe that it will be possible to use these data products which are prepared by Copernicus land monitoring service in the future. But for these previous products, what we saw that when data product already is published, it is already like too old to be used. But on the other hand, these data products are quite useful as reference data, what you can use, for example, for your improved classification. And if you want to improve classification, then Sentinel data is quite useful to reach accuracy like about like 90%. And also, I demonstrated that there is detection of ploughing and tillage events, and it also, talking about accuracies, it also depends like on how large area you are looking at. But for these areas which we were looking at, the accuracy was between something like 80 or 90% for detection of ploughing events. And also similar was like when you're looking at this mowing event detection. Yes, and at the end, what I also showed that spectral data also is useful for assessment of productivity of grasslands, which also can provide like with like more deeper like classification of such land cover layers as grasslands, and maybe also can be applied for other like agricultural land classes. Okay. Thanks also to the project within which this study was performed, and also to the Rural Support Service for sharing reference data. And here you can see my contacts. If you have any questions or see some kind of future interesting cooperation, you can email me and we can discuss it. But now I'm open for your questions.
Thank you, Dainis. We're right on time now. Eva, could you please share the Menti screen? So we have a question about this land cover classification. You talked about different types. Maybe you could slightly explain when and why is it worth to carry your own land cover classification?
Yes, I think I already answered this question, but one more time, I would say that what I can see that from each update, these Copernicus data products, they are improving much. What we can see, for example, if you're looking at high resolution layers, which are basically suitable for GHG monitoring to be used, but there is huge difference between a layer which was available in 2015 and then in 2018, and I believe that it will be even more improved in 2021. And but still, when we are looking in these pan-European layers, what you should expect, there will be always some kind of error, because if you're preparing some kind of land cover classification for European layer, you're using reference data for all Europe, and the accuracy of land cover classification increases if you have some kind of local reference data and you adapt these algorithms for some local classification. And if we are talking about currently like using it as for GHG inventory and comparing to currently used data, I think there will be no huge difference. But of course, if we are looking at more and more higher accuracies in future, then I believe that some kind of region-specific algorithms they can improve this accuracy if it's needed. And currently, I would say it is worse to carry out your own classification just because these data layers, they are available with maximal this frequency just every like 3 years. Basically, I'm talking about these high resolution layers. But currently we need this annual updates, and in this case, yes, you should perform your own classification or use some other available data products. But I believe that it's better to invest and to perform your own classification.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. Would it be possible to evaluate crop productivity by remote sensing and not only on grassland productivity?
Yeah, I would say, and there is a lot of studies which show that it can be done from satellite data, but these models, they are usually trained for specific crop. Basically, you are choosing one particular crop and develop model for it, and then you can see like how it can be transferable between regions. But I would say, yeah, there is a lot of examples which showing that satellite data could be used for productivity prediction, also for crops. It's just a matter of development of particular models which can provide you with sufficient accuracy.
Okay, thank you. It seems that we have no more questions, so we can wrap up the day. For me personally, it was very knowledge intensive. So I'd like to thank all the speakers and the audience and the colleagues who helped organize this event. I'd also like to thank the project partners, Latvian Fund for Nature, Latvian Rural Advisory and Training Center, as well as the Czech Center for Science and Society, and the LIFE program, which funded this project, so Climate Responsible Agriculture for Latvia. It's also co-funded by the State Regional Development Agency. These presentations will be available on our website, as well as the recording of the whole event. So thank you everyone once more for attending the event, and I hope all of you have a nice rest of the day.